What is up, my friend? Happy Friday. Sorry that I'm 2 minutes late. Here's the one thing about running your own business is that you're wearing so many hats, it's really easy to lose track of time. But welcome. We are live. We're ready to roll. This is episode 45. Kind of fitting that I missed last week's live episode. I had to take a little bit of a mental break, take a day off. But today is episode 45. Should I call it the Michael Jordan comeback jersey? Nah, he changed it to back to 23 later anyway. But welcome in to episode 45, the live Friday show. I go live every Friday at noon and we talk about the upcoming week of fantasy football. I have 30 plus hours of research just swimming around my head. So I'm here to answer as many questions as I possibly can over the next 60, 90, maybe 120 minutes as we've seen in the past. Let's dive in. Woo, baby. It is good to be back, my friends. It is so good to be back. I've been down here just blasting top 40 music. I just kind of felt like switching it up. And there's a lot of new music that I haven't even heard yet, but just getting in the right mind space. Thanks for bearing with me as I took a week off last week, kind of canceled the show somewhat last minute. Just, being a one-man business, being a one-man operation, sometimes you just get beat down and you get punched in the gut a lot of times. And sometimes you just need to take a day to unplug. And unfortunately, that just happened to be last Friday. So hopefully you didn't miss me too much. Although what a conceited thing to say, as if anybody missed me at all. Let's be honest about it. But appreciate everybody that's tuning in here to episode 45. Now, if you're new to the show, the idea here is that I'm going to answer as many of your questions as I possibly can. So feel free to start dropping them in the comments. Looks like we got a couple popping in. We got Jordan, Basement Brood Fantasy Friday. Thanks for being here, good sir. Hopefully the wedding a couple weeks back wasn't too bad. I know you had to go to the land of the Vikings, so that's kind of a bummer. That's not too cool, but thanks for popping in back in here. My man GQ is in the house. GQ, I love you. Thank you for being here, buddy. And then, it looks like we got some other questions. We got some questions already popping into the chat. So we're going to get to those in a minute. I will answer as many as I possibly can. Now, before I dive into those, I thought it might make sense for me to kind of explain not how this show came to be, but why it's relevant and why it's helpful. So if you're not yet familiar with me and you've never tuned into the show, you don't know anything about my story, the last 3 days, every single week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I spend over 30 hours every single week researching the fantasy football landscape. I'm quite literally researching every single, Adam's comment totally threw me off track. Let's talk about the Vikings today. Let's spend the whole episode talking about the Vikings. Go Rams, big Rams fan today. But as I was saying, every week from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I spend over 30 hours a week researching quite literally every single player on every single team. I look at every game, the players that could make an impact on that game, how that game is going to go. And it takes me 30 plus hours to create a weekly resource that I call the heat map, which you can see right here. This is the resource that led to me quitting the corporate world, quitting my corporate career and starting this business and doing this full time after it went somewhat viral on Reddit a couple years back. Now, what this resource is it's designed to help you with a lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is really, really difficult start-sit conundrums. Although a lot of people use it for DFS, a lot of people use it for they use it for prop betting if you're in a state that's legal, or if you go to, Potawatomi or a local casino where you can do sports betting. There's a lot of people that use this. Let me pump it up here for a minute. That use it for NFL betting. It takes me 30 plus hours to create this because, like I said, I'm literally researching every game, looking at how the game is going to shake out. I'm looking at every single player that is relevant in that game for fantasy purposes. And I'm writing a note. I'm writing an analysis for every single player in every single game, every single week. So I was asking one of my subscribers yesterday how he would explain the heat map to somebody who's never seen it before. And I loved his answer. He said, it's basically he called it somewhat of a Bible, but he said it's basically to help me get my mind right and cross-check my lineups, make sure my lineups are exactly how they should look every single week. So today we are going to dive into all of those 30 plus hours that are swimming around my head after doing all that research this week. If it's all there, if I've put in all that work, I might as well share it with the world and share it with you and help you sort through some of your most difficult decisions as we get into these things. Now, generally speaking, I thought it would help to know some games that I'm targeting. So moving forward, if you have players in these games, know that they get a boost in quote unquote rankings. They get a boost in week 8 likelihood of a productive outcome. I'm a fan of the Cardinals-Dolphins game. And when I say things like I'm a fan, I don't mean for it to sound like in my gut, I like this game. I'm using data to say things like I like this game. And what I mean by that is you can see that this game has a pretty healthy over-under of 46.5 points. It's not the highest, but it's certainly not the lowest. It's an above average over-under. Both teams have an implied point total of at least 21 points. You got Kyler Murray on one side, Tua Tagovailoa is back on the other side. Praise be. This game has the makings of a sneaky, low-key shootout. It's a game that I wouldn't mind targeting in my week 8 fantasy football lineups. And again, that's not my gut. That's not my gut telling me that. It's, hey, the over-under looks good. The implied point totals look good. It's a good two good quarterbacks. The Cardinals defense has struggled in the past. Lots to like there. Whereas the Jets-Patriots game, this is a game that I'm not necessarily banging the table to get into my fantasy football lineup. It's going to be a low-scoring game, over-under of just 41.5. The Patriots have a dangerously low implied total of just under 18 points. They're, generally speaking, not a team that I'm trying to get into my lineup. But the games that I want to target this week, Eagles, Bengals. If you have any Eagles, if you have any Bengals, generally speaking, we want to get them into our lineups. Looks like it's going to be a high scoring game at 47.5 points. It's going to be a close game. It's not like it's going to be the sort of thing where it's a blowout, which we do see a couple of those this week. I'll see if I can grab a quick example for you. Let's see. Well, like the Chiefs and Raiders, right? Low scoring game, but the Chiefs should be fine. They should be scoring plenty of points here. Or here's a perfect example. Titans, Lions, 44.5 point over under is pretty solid, but it's going to be all Lions. It's not going to be all Titans. So we're targeting Dolphins, Cardinals. We're targeting Eagles, Bengals. We're targeting Packers, Jaguars. This game has shootout written all over it. 49.5 point over under. Both teams have an implied point total of at least 23 points. Jaguars defense is terrible. There's a lot to love about that game for fantasy football purposes. And we are also targeting the Bills Seahawks game. Has some sneaky shootout potential as well. So those are the games that we're trying to proactively target with our week 8 fantasy football lineups. If you have players in those games, just know that they're not necessarily automatic starts, but they do get a boost in the rankings. Okay. So let's start diving into some of the questions, some of the conundrums that you have for week 8. I'm getting an error message on my thing that says the internet connection is not well. If you guys are listening, if somebody can drop a comment letting me know, like if you guys can hear me and see me okay, that would be super helpful because I'm getting an error message on my screen that says the internet is unstable and you guys might not be able to hear me. So anyways, let's hope that that's not the case. It wouldn't be too fun sitting here just talking to nobody. All right. I can see you perfectly. Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate that because I was definitely starting to think that it just wasn't working. So I appreciate it. All right, let's hop into some of these. If you have week 8 questions, if you have week 8 comments, definitely drop them in the comments below. We already have some to start with, and we're going to dive into those in 1 minute right after we hear from our sponsor real quickly. Are you a software wizard? A code ninja? A forge master? Or maybe even just a mad scientist? Then come build your career ladder with Infinity Labs, an award-winning technology company, best place to work, and business of the year with best-in-class benefits and compensation. Visit i-labs.tech. That's i-labs.tech today, where you can learn more about Infinity Labs, our expanding national presence, and why the status quo has no hold on us. All right, y'all, let's dive into this thing. Our first question of the day is from Mr. Jordan Poggle. Jordan, I love this guy because about 5 minutes prior to showtime, I was hopping onto Twitter to do the whole, one man business, got to be the marketer, the promoter, got to do it all. I was hopping onto Twitter to do the 5 minutes till I go live thing. And I clicked on the YouTube link and I saw that there was one person waiting for the show to start. And I got to think that's Jordan. Jordan I love you, man. I love how eager you are to get into the show. So first question, he's first in line. He's the guy who's like camped out in the parking lot waiting for the show to begin. Here we go. Need to flex, full PPR. He wants to know Drake London, Kenneth Walker, Tank Dell, Jordan Mason, and Garrett Wilson. Man, this is a great problem to have. Like if you're sitting three of these guys are going to be on your bench. Drake London, Ken Walker, Tank Dell, Jordan Mason, Garrett Wilson. Got to tell you, man, that is a terrific, terrific problem to have. All right. Let's start with Drake London. Okay. Falcons. So hop over to the heat map here. Falcons, Bengals. Now, Drake London, I feel like I don't even need to dig into this one. Drake London he's been trending into territory where he's an every week starter, no matter what. Like he's locked into your lineup. And here's why. Let me pull him up real quick. Drake London right here. So every week in the heat map, if you're not familiar with the heat map, I give you a preview of what to expect from the game in the game script column, how the player has been trending in recent weeks. If applicable, I tell you how he does against that specific team and how that team does against his position. Drake London is trending towards every week starter, regardless of situation or matchup. And here's why. He's averaging 19.9 PPR points per game over the last 6 contests. And perhaps not more importantly, but why he is an every week starter is this guy's getting dang near 10 targets every single game. He's averaging 9.8 targets per game, 7 catches, 79 yards, and ultimately dang near 20 PPR points per game. He has 7 or more targets in each of the last 6 games, including, and this will get where it gets really fun, 10 or more targets in 3 of the last 4 games. I don't need to remind you, or maybe I do, what he did against Tampa Bay literally just a few weeks ago. I believe it was week 5. He absolutely wrecked the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in his first game with Kirk Cousins at quarterback. He caught 12 of 13 targets for 154 yards, 1 touchdown, and 33.4 PPR points just a few weeks ago in week 5. Now, the second meeting between two teams historically tends to be a little bit lower scoring than the first team, right? Each defense has the offense a little bit, quote unquote, figured out, so to speak. And also the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're definitely not at full staff. They lost both Chris Godwin. They lost Mike Evans. It's fair to wonder if they'll be able to keep it. Like this game probably won't shoot out the same way that it did in week 5, but still with the targets that Drake London is getting, this is a guy that you cannot have this guy on your bench in any week. Okay. So he's locked in without even reading the other names. Now, Ken Walker, same thing. This dude is looking like an every week type of RB1. I mean, this is already a guy, but man, you only need 2 of these, right? Tank Dell is probably going to be the odd man out, would be my guess. Garrett Wilson is probably going to be the odd man out, is going to be my guess. Jordan Mason is going to be tough to keep on the bench. Let's look over at Kenneth Walker here real quick. So we already talked about Seahawks Bills. This, generally speaking, is a game that we want to target. Now, the game script itself, the Bills at Seahawks, it's a solid over under 47.5 points, which is tied for the 3rd highest among all 16 games on the full week 8 slate. Both teams have a nice implied total of at least 22 points, giving this game some sneaky shootout potential. The Seahawks are kind of in the middle of the pack among all 32 teams in terms of their implied point total, 22.25. It's not terrible, but it's not particularly great. What we don't really like for Kenneth Walker in this game is that the Seahawks are 3-point underdogs. Generally speaking, being the running back on an underdog is a little bit of a red flag because there's always the possibility of a negative game script that would force an offense to quote unquote abandon the run, which could threaten rushing volume for the running back on the underdog team. Now, that being said, the spread in the Bills Seahawks game is just 3. It's not wide enough to be considered a death sentence. It's not a good thing for Kenneth Walker, but it's not a death sentence either. It's not like the Titans, who are 11.5 point underdogs. Like Tony Pollard is a terrifying fantasy football investment in week 8. That's not necessarily the case for the Seahawks. Beyond that, Kenneth Walker is doing what we did not see him do in college, which is catch passes. The Seahawks are using him in the passing game. He's averaging 5.2 targets per game. He's plenty involved in the passing game, even if the Seahawks are forced into a pass-heavy approach. There are some running backs in football where negative game script is actually a good thing. Think about like Alvin Kamara, a guy who could pop off 8 catches because the Saints have to throw the ball, and he's arguably their best receiver, not named, well, maybe, including, I mean, I'm not trying to take away from Chris Olave. I'm just trying to talk about how awesome Alvin Kamara is. I'm not saying Kenneth Walker is that guy. He's not necessarily a guy that I would bank on getting a ton of catches, but it's not impossible. Like, it's happened this year as recently as I think 2 weeks ago. He had about 7 catches. Now, he is averaging an elite 22.3 PPR points per game over 5 games. He's getting nearly 18 touches per game. He's getting 5.2 targets per game. The guy is absolutely balling right now. He scored 14 or more PPR points in all 5 games. He scored 18 or more PPR points in 4 of 5 games, and he scored 20 or more points in 3 of the last 4. The Bills, by the way, have been getting absolutely smashed by running backs. They're allowing the 7th most catches, 13th most rushing yards, 2nd most catches. Well, something's a typo there. I have to change that. But anyway, they're getting smashed by running backs. They are holding them to the 10th fewest rushing touchdowns. But you'll see here, closer to Kenneth Walker, there have been 7 running backs to face the Bills that have handled 15 or more touches against them, 5 of which were able to score 15 or more PPR points. Likewise, there have been 4 running backs who handled 20 or more touches against the Bills, all of which were able to score at least 20 PPR points. So generally speaking, there's a reason that Kenneth Walker is in the green column with a green dot. Right here, we feel good about him. We would feel good about having Kenneth Walker in our lineup. Tank Dell is coming off a 0 catch game against the Green Bay Packers. I like Tank Dell a lot, and I like him this week, but I don't like him nearly enough to be even in the conversation with Drake London or Kenneth Walker. Unfortunately, I would say the same thing about Garrett Wilson. Jets at Patriots, generally speaking, that's not a game I'm banging the table to get. I'm not too worried about the Jets in particular. They have a nice implied point total of 24.25 points. I'm not necessarily worried about the matchup either, being, the Patriots are allowing the 14th most PPR points per game to wide receivers, but the Jets are 7-point favorites. The Patriots are not even expected to score 18 points. So theoretically, we're thinking the Jets should be able to win this game with their defense. Aaron Rodgers shouldn't have to throw the ball 40 times to win the game. And if he does, we know Devontae Adams is in place. I don't want this to sound like I don't like Garrett Wilson. I do like Garrett Wilson. I think a lot of people are possibly making a mistake if they're panic trading Wilson after the Jets acquired Devontae Adams. But in this situation, if I can choose Drake London and I can choose Kenneth Walker over him, I am. So in my mind, Tank Dell is out. Garrett Wilson is out. The only other one here, though, is the freaking Jordan Mason against the Cowboys. This one is absolutely mouthwatering. If there's anybody who can unseat Kenneth Walker in this situation, it's Jordan Mason. The game in general is one that I want to target, right? The Cowboys 49ers. 47.5 point over under. Here, I'll just pop open Jordan Mason's note here. The game itself, the 49ers, they have a really strong implied total, 25 points, which is tied for the 9th most among all 32 teams. They're 4.5 point favorites at home, which is always a good thing for a running back on the favored team, especially a running back like Jordan Mason, who really doesn't do a lot in the passing game. Also, this is most likely his last game as the 49ers number 1 running back. So he won't have any issue going balls to the wall. The 49ers probably won't have any issue just feeding him as much as he can possibly handle, knowing that the bye week is on deck and Christian McCaffrey is on the way. The 49ers are 4.5 point favorites. They should run, volume is not going to be an issue. They're going to run the ball a ton. And then you got the matchup. And if there's, we talked about the Bills giving up a lot of production to running backs, but the Cowboys have been arguably worse against running backs. They're allowing the 11th most touches, 10th most rushing yards, and 3rd most rushing touchdowns. Now, they're also allowing the 6th most receiving yards and 9th most receiving touchdowns, though that doesn't really matter for a guy like Jordan Mason. Ultimately, the Cowboys are allowing the 3rd most PPR points per game to opposing running backs. Now, there have been just 2 running backs who handled, get this one, this is an interesting one. There have been 2 running backs that have handled 20 or more touches against the Cowboys. That's it. Yet there have been 3 running backs who scored at least 20 PPR points against the Cowboys. Better yet, not a single running back has handled 30 or more touches. I mean, that's not a surprise. That's a ton of touches. But 2 different running backs have scored more than 30 PPR points against the Dallas Cowboys. Jerome Ford, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, David Montgomery, all 4 of those guys absolutely smashed against the Dallas Cowboys, while Devin Singletary and Najee Harris were really the only 2 that missed the mark when they played against Dallas. So we love Jordan Mason this week. In fact, as I talk through this, I'm just going to go ahead and change Jordan Mason's dot to a blue dot, because he should arguably be hanging out in the "you my boy blue" column, which if you're in the blue column, that means all of the data, all of the signs are pointing to an eruption week. And this is a really, really good week to feel good about Jordan Mason. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but if it were me in this decision, Jordan, I would be taking Jordan Mason over Kenneth Walker, just knowing that the Seahawks are 3-point underdogs. Like, that is the tiebreaker to me, that the Seahawks are not favored, right? It's the sort of game where you could theoretically see the Bills getting off to a hot start and Seattle spinning their wheels trying to keep up with them, especially without DK Metcalf. So for me, it's Drake London and it's Jordan Mason. Kenneth Walker is, oddly enough, the odd man out. The one thing I will say here, though, Jordan, is if you're looking for safety and guaranteed touches, Kenneth Walker and Jordan Mason are going to be the safer plays. But again, it's really hard to leave a guy like Drake London on the bench right now. So hopefully that helps. I'm going Drake London and Jordan Mason. But like, Jordan Mason versus Kenneth Walker is like 51-49. It's basically a coin flip. Hope that helps. All right. Demise wants to know, would you start Cade Otton or Travis Kelce at tight end this week? Man, how far have we come that is a question? You know, like, imagine asking me this question last year or in week 1, for example. The tight end position this year is just wild. Like, Travis Kelce doesn't have a touchdown yet. Sam Laporta is averaging less than 4 targets per game. Mark Andrews is scoring touchdowns, but he's still not getting targets. Dalton Kincaid's not doing anything. Like, Trey McBride is the only one of the top 5 tight ends doing anything that's actually like consistent, right? It looks like it's going to be Brock Bowers is going to be the guy rest of the year. Who else was I just writing about the other day that's going to be a threat for the rest of the year? Whatever. We'll get there. Would you start Cade Otton or Travis Kelce this week? Wild. Now, I will say before I hop in, I love Cade Otton moving forward for at least the next 3 weeks. Mike Evans was averaging 7 targets per game, and he's out for at least the next 3 games. Chris Godwin is averaging 8.9 targets per game, and as you know, he is unfortunately out for the rest of the season. So that leaves 16-ish Baker Mayfield targets every game for the next 3 weeks that need to find new homes in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers passing attack. And the only other weapon that has been even remotely consistent for Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers is Cade Otton. Now, Jalen McMillan, who's their 3rd-round rookie. They also have Sterling Shepard, who's a former 2nd-round pick in his own right. And then Trey Palmer played a ton of snaps last week. All 3 of those guys are going to be asked to step up and play a role. But if you're looking for that next man up, the most logical next target monster would be Cade Otton. He's already been involved in the offense, even with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Even prior to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin going down, Cade Otton had 6 or more targets in 3 of the last 4 games, and he scored 11 or more PPR points in 2 of them. Again, like I just said, it's not a coincidence that Cade Otton set new season highs in targets with 10. He had 10 targets last week, 8 catches, 100 yards, and 18 PPR points. It's no coincidence that he did all of that in the same game that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin went down. Although Chris Godwin doesn't really count. That was right towards the end of the game. Still, it's not a coincidence that Cade Otton went off. Like, he is a legitimate tight end 1 moving forward, if not like a top 5, top 6 tight end for at least the next 2 or 3 weeks. I would have a really difficult time leaving him on the bench. Now, the game itself isn't one that I'm staying away from, right? We saw the Falcons and Buccaneers combine for 66 points just a few weeks ago in week 5. Like, we know there is shootout potential in this game. The Falcons have been pretty good against tight ends. They're holding them to the 13th fewest catches, 15th fewest yards, no touchdowns, and ultimately the 10th fewest PPR points per game. Noah Fant scored the high against Atlanta, quote unquote high, which is 10.5 PPR points against Atlanta last week. But he is the only tight end that has faced the Falcons this year, including K. Dotton, that has been able to hit 10 PPR points. Pat Freiermuth didn't, Dallas Goedert didn't, Travis Kelce didn't, and Cade Otton himself didn't, although these are much, much different circumstances for Cade Otton. Okay, so we're feeling good about Cade Otton as somewhat of a, it's wild to say this, but as far as a safe play goes, right? He's one of the few tight ends in football where we can project significant volume coming his way, especially because the Buccaneers are 2.5-point underdogs, theoretically meaning that at some point they might need to turn to a pass-heavy approach to try and keep up with the Atlanta Falcons. We like Cade Otton this week. But then, of course, you got Travis Kelce, who, like, in what world can you bench Travis Kelce? I guess the 2024 world is where you can bench him. You feel good about the Chiefs' implied total. They're going to score 25.5 points. What you don't really love, here, I'll just pop open his name real quick. What you don't really love for Travis Kelce in this particular game is that the Chiefs are 9.5-point road favorites. Okay, they're expected to just run away with this one. The Raiders have an implied point total of just 16 points. Okay, so they're not expected to score a lot of points. It's fair to wonder if the Chiefs could get some of their points from the defensive side of the ball. What I'm getting at, it's fair to wonder how many times Patrick Mahomes is even going to be asked to throw the ball in this game, because the Chiefs should theoretically win this game relatively easily. If Patrick Mahomes isn't going to throw the ball a lot, then there's not going to be a lot of target volume for his pass catchers. Now, up to this point, Travis Kelce has been mediocre like every other tight end in football. 8.8 PPR points per game, 6 targets per game. He's been fine. He's been usable, but it hasn't been pretty. Now, we got DeAndre Hopkins joining the mix to take some targets away, although I wouldn't expect too many targets in his first game. He just joined the team 6 days ago. Now, here's what's really exciting, although it should always be taken with a grain of salt. Travis Kelce has played he's played against the Raiders 12 times with Patrick Mahomes in his career, and he's averaging 19.4 PPR points and 8.8 targets per game. Now, again, we're talking about a different Travis Kelce, not the 2024 version that we've seen up to this point. He scored 15 or more PPR points in 7 of 12 games against the Raiders. This one's fun. He has more career games over 20 PPR points as a tight end against the Raiders. He's done that 5 times in 12 games. He has more of those than he has games under 10 points against the Raiders with just 3. He's absolutely destroyed and annihilated the Las Vegas Raiders up to this point in his career. The Raiders are doing pretty well. Oh, by the way, the Raiders are doing pretty well against tight ends. They're holding him to the 8th fewest catches, 9th fewest yards, 12th fewest touchdowns, 8th fewest PPR points. Some dude named Blake Whiteheart scored. You can do 30 plus hours of weekly research and find players that you've never heard of in your entire life. This dude scored 10.3 PPR points against the Raiders in week 4, and he remains the only tight end to face the Raiders this year that was able to reach 10 PPR points against the Raiders. Mark Andrews didn't, Isaiah Likely didn't, Pat Freiermuth didn't, and Colby Parkinson didn't. So in their defense, the Raiders didn't necessarily play a murderer's row of tight ends, right? Mark Andrews is the best name on that list, and Mark Andrews has not been Mark Andrews this year. So the Raiders have been tough against tight ends, but it might not be as devastating of a matchup as it looks. What I'll say here is, if you want to go with the safe route here, Demise, Cade Otton feels like a safer play than Travis Kelce is, just based on raw volume projection. The dude should get targets in this game. Kelce obviously has that massive, massive ceiling, that massive, massive upside. This dude has scored 15 or more PPR points against the Raiders, 7 of 12 games he's played. More than 50% of the time, he's getting you 15 points against the Raiders. But again, Chiefs won't necessarily need to throw the ball all that much. It's fair to wonder how many times they'll be asked to throw the ball versus the Buccaneers, who could be asked to throw the ball in what could turn into a high scoring game. I'm a guy who makes decisions off of data, meaning I try to take the name out of it. If you gave me player A as Cade Otton and all of the data, and player B as Travis Kelce and all of the data, I would be choosing player A. Like, I want to tell you, Demise, to pick Travis Kelce because I feel like every other fantasy football analyst would tell you to pick Travis Kelce, but that's not me. Like, that's not like fantasy pros can help you with that part. The whole point of the heat map is to use data to make these decisions. And to me, the data points at K. Dotton in this decision. I am really tomorrow. I'm going to be watching these games and really hoping I didn't get that one wrong. And if I do get it wrong, then I hope you didn't listen to me. But if it were me, I would be rolling the dice and going with K. Dotton on this one. Wild. I can't even believe I said that. I felt a little bit sick saying that, but again, if I take the names out of the equation and I just look at the data, it would point at K. Dotton. So hopefully that helps. And by the way, if you go with Travis Kelce, I will not fault you at all for that. I'm not saying to me, it's not like 80% K. Dotton and 20% Travis Kelce. It's like 51 to 49. It's close. Dan B wants to know 0.5 PPR. Okay, so I have point PPR. Which two guys do I start at flex? Here's how I view my options from best to worst. Wondering if you agree. Javonte Williams. Love Javonte this week. We'll get into that. Cedric Tillman. Definitely trending in the right direction. Chris Olave. Man, how far have we come? We're 8 weeks into the season and we got Cedric Tillman ranked ahead of Chris Olave, which I like. I'm not saying you're wrong. It's just wild that that's even a thing. Then we also got Tucker Kraft. I'm not big on flexing tight ends. They don't have the same upside as the other guys do. Tank Bigsby, obviously he's balling. That's going to depend big time on Travis Etienne's availability. And Keon Coleman. Thanks. All right. So I will tell you right off the bat that I absolutely freaking love Javonte Williams this week. Here's why. Let's go to game 13. I never thought I would do this, but I have Javonte Williams in the green column, the feel good column, with a blue dot, meaning if he's trending in one direction, he's trending towards column A, which is like all signs point to a big week. Now, he already had a big week last week. Here's what we're thinking for this week. The game script is colored blue. We love the projected game script for Javonte Williams. The Broncos themselves have a strong implied point total of 25.5 points, which is tied for the fifth most among all 32 teams on the week 8 slate. What that tells us is that there shouldn't necessarily be a shortage of touchdowns for the Broncos offense. And a lot of times when an offense gets into the red zone and has an opportunity to score touchdowns, the running back gets involved. We saw Javonte Williams score 2 of them last week. So generally speaking, the Broncos should be a high-scoring team, giving Javonte Williams a better than average chance of scoring a touchdown or 2. Then you look at the spread. The Broncos are muscle flexing 9.5 point home favorites in week 8. Okay. So this is expected to be a blowout victory, a 2-score victory, meaning it's a supremely positive game script that is not going to threaten the rushing volume for Broncos ball carriers. If anything, this is one of those weeks where Broncos ball carriers could enjoy a massive spike in rushing opportunities, because if they are up by 2 scores in the second half, Denver's not going to be putting the ball in the air with their rookie quarterback. They're going to be trying to run the clock out as much as possible. Javonte Williams is going to be the number one option to do that. But then you look at the matchup. Okay. So we already like the game script. Broncos are going to score points. Javonte Williams is going to get volume. Okay. So there's touchdown opportunities, there's rushing attempts. And now we're talking about efficiency. When we look at the matchup, the Panthers are getting destroyed. They are the worst team in all of fantasy football when it comes to containing running backs. Okay. They're hemorrhaging the most rushing yards, the most rushing touchdowns, the third most receiving touchdowns, and the most PPR points per game. These guys are allowing 2 running back touchdowns every single game. There have only been 2 running backs that have handled 20 or more touches against the Carolina Panthers, but there have been 5 running backs in 7 games that have scored 20 or more PPR points against the Carolina Panthers this year. 7 running backs in 7 games have scored at least 15 points against the Carolina Panthers. Alvin Kamara smashed, J.K. Dobbins smashed, Alexander Madison, Chase Brown, Zach Moss, DeAndre Swift, Rashawn Johnson, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, all of those guys smashed against the Carolina Panthers, while Gus Edwards and Zamir White are the two that didn't do much, that did not do what they should have done against Carolina Panthers. Absolutely love Javonte Williams this week. I intend to have him in a lot of my DFS lineups. I intend to target him a ton on drafters. Big Javonte Williams fan. Now, he would be locked in this, like, out of all these. If I have to pick two, Javonte Williams is one without even digging into the rest. Now, as for Cedric Tillman, remind me who the Browns... What are the Browns? Oh, yeah. Game against the Ravens. So this one could be ugly for the Browns just in general. Their implied point total is just 18 points. Not expected to score a lot of points. Not expected to score a lot of touchdowns. And touchdowns are where fantasy football points come from. Now, that being said, there is definitely some upside to Cedric Tillman. There's some upside to Jerry Jeudy in this matchup. So I have them in column C, which is the yellow column. It just means I wouldn't feel great about them in my lineup. I wouldn't feel terrible about them in my lineup. I just feel, all right, fine. If I don't have other options, then he's in there. Now, I'm considering him a wide receiver 4/flex. He's on that radar this week, thanks to his sudden promotion. Like, this dude, we'll talk about this in a second. He played a ton of snaps he balled out last week. So we love his promotion and his playing time, but he also has a really nice matchup. There's going to be a pass-heavy game script with Cleveland expected to lose by a lot. And he's playing with a quarterback in Jameis Winston that is willing to chuck the ball around the yard. If there's one thing we learned about Jameis Winston is that he's willing to YOLO ball it and just throw the thing all over the place. Now, again, they have a really nauseating implied point total. It's up to 18 points, but still, the Browns aren't expected to score a lot of touchdowns. So if you're banking on Cedric Tillman, then you're banking on catches and yards, because more than his likelihood of finding the end zone isn't very high. But what we do like is that the Browns are gut-wrenching 9.5-point underdogs in their own house against the Baltimore Ravens, which suggests a blowout loss, which doesn't sound like a good thing, but for wide receivers and for tight ends and people who pass or catch passes in that offense, they could enjoy a spike in target volume. Now, that would be more appetizing in a full PPR league, not a half PPR league, but still, there's a chance that the Browns get blown out in this game, meaning they're going to have to throw the ball all over the place. So Cedric Tillman could enjoy a nice amount of targets. Now, Cedric, then you look at the matchup itself, and it's a really good one. Like, the Ravens have long been a name that on defense is scary, right? Generally speaking, you haven't wanted to go up against the Ravens in years past, but that's not the case in 2024. They're actually one of the worst. They're one of the better defenses to attack in fantasy football. They are hemorrhaging the 5th most catches, 3rd most yards, most touchdowns, and 3rd most PPR points per game to opposing wide receivers. They're getting spanked by wide receivers. 6 different wide receivers in 7 games have scored at least 17 or more PPR points against the Ravens, 5 of which scored more than 20. Okay, so 5 wide receivers in 7 games have scored at least 20 PPR points against the Ravens. Rashee Rice, may he rest in peace, he did well. Xavier Worthy, Devontae Adams, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, all of those guys did really well against the Baltimore Ravens. The only notable name that really flopped against Baltimore was CeeDee Lamb. Now, does Cedric Tillman belong in this company? We don't know yet. It's way, way too soon, but he's definitely off to a really, really, really good start, right? The first game that the Browns played without Amari Cooper, Cedric Tillman, who, by the way, is a 2023 3rd-round pick. It's not like he's one of those undrafted free agents that comes out of nowhere, flames out after like 6 games. He's a high draft pick for the Browns, 3rd-round pick last year from Tennessee. He played 82% of the offensive snaps, and he caught 8 of 12 targets for 81 scoreless yards in their first game without Amari Cooper. He's going to be working with Jameis Winston moving forward. And if there's one thing we learned about Jameis over the years, like I mentioned, this dude's willing to chuck it. Like, he's going to throw the ball, interceptions be damned. And that's a good, like, generally speaking, having a Jameis Winston receiver on your fantasy team is not a bad thing, because they don't get penalized for his interceptions. Okay. Now, I did a little bit of digging, and this is part of what I'm doing for the heat map every week. That's why 300 plus fantasy football players are using this thing when they set their lineups every week. 3 of the 4 most heavily targeted seasons of Mike Evans' career. Okay, this guy's been around for a decade, and 3 of his 4 most heavily targeted seasons came from having Jameis Winston at quarterback. Not Baker Mayfield, not Tom Brady. Jameis Winston is the guy who just peppered Mike Evans with as many targets as he could possibly stomach, including each of his 2 most highest targeted seasons in his entire career. Mike Evans had a career high in catches with Jameis Winston in 2016. He had 96 catches. 3 of his 5 highest yardage seasons were with Jameis Winston at quarterback, 2016, 2015, and 2019. And likewise, the most touchdowns and the highest yardage season of Chris Godwin's career was in 2019. He had 9 touchdowns and 1,333 yards with Jameis Winston at quarterback. Like, you can say what you will about Jameis Winston, but he gets his dudes the football. Plain and simple. Someone in that Browns catching core is going to eat. Now, a 1-game sample size points at Cedric Tillman, but it is just a 1-game sample size. Jerry Jeudy's probably a better long-term bet than Cedric Tillman, but Tillman's off to a great start. He doesn't come close to Javonte Williams in this equation, but we're feeling optimistic about Cedric Tillman moving forward, even if this week in particular might be a little bit too soon to roll the dice there. Then you got Chris Olave, who ordinarily is a guy that I wouldn't want on my bench just based on the sheer talent and the upside that he brings to the table. But with Spencer Rattler at quarterback, obviously a lot of that changes. Saints at Chargers. Let me pop open game number 10. I'll tell you right now that I know we're not feeling particularly optimistic about Chris Olave. We have him in the yellow column, but with an orange dot, meaning he's getting closer to the feel gross column than the feel good column. I mean, there's not a lot to like about this game in particular. The Saints have a nauseating implied point total of just it might have even changed now. 16.75 points. So they have the 4th lowest implied point total in all of football. And all 32 teams are playing this week, and they have the 4th lowest implied point total. We're not expecting touchdowns from the New Orleans Saints in week 8. Now, what we do like is that they are 7.5-point road underdogs. So like we were just talking about with the Browns, theoretically, they're going to have to throw the ball if they want any shot of catching up to or keeping up with the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, even with Derek Carr, Chris Olave wasn't doing a heck of a lot. He's averaging just 11.2 PPR points per game with Derek Carr, and that's not even factoring in that downgrade to Spencer Rattler. He's averaging just 5.6 targets per game, which is way too low for a guy like Chris Olave. He has 2 games under 4 PPR points, 2 games over 16 PPR points, and 1 game right in the middle of 12.8. And as for the matchup itself, though, the Chargers are tough on wide receivers this year, holding them to the 2nd fewest PPR points per game. Just 3 wide receivers in 6 games have been able to score 15 PPR points against the Chargers, and none of them were able to get to 20. Just 7 in 6 games have even been able to reach 10. Calvin Austin, Xavier Worthy, and Cortland Sutton, of all players, were the guys who hit against the Chargers. But guys like Devontae Adams, George Pickens, Marvin Harrison, all of those guys whiffed when they went up against the Chargers. Not a lot of reason to feel optimistic about Chris Olave. Tucker Kraft, Green Bay Packers. Oh, generally speaking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I might consider recommending flexing a tight end here. That's usually a big no-no for me. But I mean, there's a lot to like about this game. Tucker Kraft has been balling. He had that beautiful, beautiful touchdown catch last year. Tucker Kraft, go Pack, go. We're feeling really good about this game. It has a blue dot. The Packers at Jaguars, really strong over under 49.5 points. The highest among all 16 games on the slate. Both teams have a top 16 implied total. Both teams are expected to score at least 23 points. Feel really, really good about that. The Packers have a strong implied total. They're expected to score about 27 points, which is the 2nd most among all 32 teams on the slate. So again, touchdowns shouldn't be an issue. There shouldn't be a shortage of touchdowns for the Green Bay Packers this year. Tucker Kraft has been one of the primary beneficiary of touchdown passes from Jordan Love this year. He's been balling as of late. You'll see here that he's averaging 0.8 touchdowns per game. This dude's got four of Jordan Love's touchdown passes this year. Okay. He has 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games with Jordan Love. He's a clear red zone threat on a high-scoring team. 12 or more PPR points in 3 of the last 4 games, including bangers of 17.3 in week 4, 24.8 in week 5. And then you got the matchup, which looks like a good one. The Jaguars struggle against tight ends. They're allowing the 7th most PPR points per game to opposing tight ends. 4 tight ends in the last 5 games have been able to score 11 or more PPR points against the Jags. 24 from Cole Kmet in week 6, 17.2 from Hunter Henry last week. Now, Dalton Kincaid, Mo Alley-Cox, Cole Kmet, Hunter Henry, all of those guys smash. Really, the only one who missed against Dalton Schultz is against the Jaguars is Dalton Schultz. So ultimately, we're feeling really good about Tucker Kraft just in general this week. Now, would I play him over Chris Olave, Cedric Tillman? That's tough, right? Tight ends just don't carry the same inherent upside as running backs and wide receivers. It's really tough to go there. Tank Bigsby, it totally depends on what's up with Travis Etienne. And Travis Etienne sounds like he's a game-time decision. The medical doctors that I follow on Twitter that play fantasy football do expect Travis Etienne to play. I'm not feeling particular. I absolutely loved Tank Bigsby last week. Loved him. Like, I was so excited about him. It's the opposite this week. There's just not a lot to love about the way that this game sets up for Tank Bigsby. Again, we talked about the over-under. We like that there should be a lot of touchdowns in this game, but what we don't like is that the Jaguars are 4.5-point underdogs. And being an underdog can be a risky scenario for running backs because, like I said, it theoretically, the Jaguars could fall behind the Packers. They could feel forced to abandon the run and keep the ball in the air. And in that situation, they would be thrown, if they throw the ball to running backs, it would go to Travis Etienne or Dearness Johnson. Tank Bigsby is the type of running back that you have in your lineup when the Jaguars are expected to win or lead or have positive game script. This game screams negative game script for the Jaguars, and the Jaguars are going to have to throw the ball to keep up with the Green Bay Packers. This is a trap game for Tank Bigsby. It's easy to chase what he did last week, but I think fantasy football managers expecting a last week performance from Tank Bigsby are going to be disappointed. So he'd be really tough to put in my lineup. Keon Coleman obviously had a great game. Generally speaking, we want to target this game, the Bills-Seahawks game. But when you look at the larger body of work for Keon Coleman, he's obviously headed in the right direction. But I mean, you got to look at the larger body of work as well. He's averaging just 8.7 PPR points per game, just 3.9 targets. Now, obviously, Amari Cooper is going to help take some of the defensive pressure off of him, but he's also going to get his fair share of targets. I wouldn't be getting Keon Coleman into my lineup quite yet. So in my mind, when I look at this, Keon Coleman's not the answer yet. Javonte Williams is in. Keon Coleman is out. I would take Tank Bigsby out. That's a trap game. There's not a lot to like about the way that it sets up for him, which leaves us with Cedric Tillman, Chris Olave, and Tucker Kraft. We're going to trust the data here and eliminate Chris Olave. Again, he's the best player in this whole thing. Chris Olave is the most talented, best player in this whole thing. He was a second round pick for a reason. But in this situation, we're going to take him out of the equation. So forced to choose between Cedric Tillman and Tucker Kraft. Man, there's a lot of upside to Tucker Kraft this week. I don't know. I don't like flexing tight ends because they just don't have the same upside as those other guys. I mean, Cedric Tillman could be a ball hog if we see anything like what we saw last week. Especially, I mean, the Browns are going to have to fling the ball all over the place. I'm not going Tank against the Packers. Although, here's what I will say about Tank Bigsby against the Packers. This game is supposed to be a shootout. Jaguars should score their fair share of points. If they get down to that 5-yard line, 4-yard line, 3-yard line, and they need to pound the ball into the end zone, Tank Bigsby is the guy that they're going to turn to. So there is some touchdown upside there. But if he doesn't score, it's going to be like Tank Bigsby is going to be a touchdown or bust option in week 8. Although the Packers, they're only 3.5-point underdogs now when they were 4.5-point. Javonte Williams, Cedric Tillman, Chris Olave, Tucker Kraft, Tank Bigsby. Javonte Williams for sure. And then, and this is half PPR. That is super important. Man, sorry, this one is taking a long time, but I want to make sure I give it the appropriate time that it needs. While Tank Bigsby scored 23 plus PPR points in 2 of the last 3 games, he was invisible just 2 weeks ago in week 6, scoring 2.4 PPR points on just 7 touches because the Jaguars were blown out by the Chicago Bears and they turned to Dearness Johnson. And we could see the same thing happening here. It can't be Bigsby. It's not Keon Coleman. It's not Olave. Chargers are too good. All right, so to me, it's between Cedric Tillman and Tucker Kraft, but are we really going to flex a tight end? Half PPR league, Packer, which means we're going to Tucker Kraft. Tucker Kraft is the answer. I just I put myself into my mode that I go into when I'm deciding on half PPR leagues where we want to emphasize touchdowns. And Tucker Kraft has a much, much better chance of finding the end zone than Cedric Tillman does. It would be a different answer if this was a full PPR league. I'd be going with Cedric Tillman. But the answer is Tucker Kraft, Javonte Williams. Final answer. Next question. Sorry it took so long for it to click for me, but eventually, once I reread half PPR, that changed things for me. All right. Demise did originally ask about Cade Otton or Travis Kelce, and then he mentioned try and trade for Trey McBride. That's never a bat. Like, if that's an option, it's worth a shot. But, I mean, you already have Travis Kelce, who should turn it around at some point. All right. Justice Reborn wants to know, Flex 1, Ricky Pearsall, Pop Douglas, or Wan'Dale Robinson. So quick caveat. I mentioned to you guys earlier in the episode that putting together this heat map takes me 30 plus hours every single week. And it's usually quote unquote done. It's never done because I have to update it on Saturday, right? Saturday, I go through all the news and kind of update. You see all these red highlights. Those are players that are injured. We don't know if they're going to play, yada, yada. I always go through on Saturday, spend an hour or 2 on Saturday, go through and update what needs to be updated. But this thing is finished. I do all of the games usually on Thursday afternoon. But after Thursday afternoon, once I press submit, and once I press send, I tend to check out a fantasy. Like, I need to recharge my batteries and back off for a minute. So I tend to watch the football game, the Rams-Vikings, the Rams beating the Vikings. CFO Adam. But I check out, I kind of unplug from injury news. So my whole point is, I haven't checked back to know if Deebo Samuel is going to go. Usually if a player has an illness, you don't even have to worry about it. But Deebo Samuel apparently had pneumonia, had fluid in his lungs. It's a little bit more complicated than we thought. But if he's going to go and Juwan Jennings is not going to go, either way, if Juwan Jennings, that's the key. If Juwan Jennings doesn't play, Ricky Pearsall is going to have some appeal in fantasy football moving forward if Jennings can't go because of Brandon Ayuk's injury. Okay, then you got Demario Douglas, who is balling with, I almost said Will Levis, with Drake May at quarterback. Either way, let's dive in here. 49ers playing the Dallas Cowboys. Generally speaking, this is a game that I want a piece of. Ricky Pearsall, the bottom line, range of outcomes is wide for Pearsall in week 8, depending on whether or not Deebo Samuel and or Juwan Jennings are ready to go. We'll update later in the week. So I would definitely recommend checking back on Saturday because Ricky Pearsall is definitely the type of guy who's standing in the heat map may change in a big way. Okay. Now, he had a very encouraging debut. He caught 3 of 5 targets, 21 scoreless yards, but he got 5 targets in his very first game as a pro. That's not bad. Brandon Ayuk is out for the season. That frees up dang near 7 targets per game that need to find new homes. Generally speaking, we want a piece of this football game. The Cowboys 49ers has a really strong over-under of 47.5 points. The 49ers have a nice implied total of 26 points, so we're expecting touchdowns in this one. Dallas has been somewhat mediocre against wide receivers. They're allowing the 15th quote-unquote most PPR points per game. 4 wide receivers in 6 games have been able to reach 14 points against the Cowboys, each of which scored at least 17 points. Rashid Shaheed, Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jameson Williams, all of those guys hit against Dallas, while Amari Cooper, Zay Flowers, and George Pickens missed. Although Zay Flowers probably shouldn't be in there because Lamar Jackson threw the ball like 14 times that game. So generally speaking, We want a piece of that game. We're fine with having a wide receiver in that game, but it depends largely on what's going on with Jawan Jennings and Deebo Samuel. If there's a world where both of those guys don't play, Deebo and Jawan, then Ricky Pearsall to the moon. Like, he's the target potential in that scenario is wild. It's almost insane. But if Deebo, on the flip side, if Deebo Samuel and Jawan Jennings play, Ricky Pearsall's not an option. If Jawan Jennings does not play and Deebo Samuel does play, Ricky Pearsall's a wide receiver 4/flex. Like, he's going to get meaningful run in a high-powered offense in a game that could shoot out. He's a solid option here. Pop Douglas. New England Patriots are going against the Jets. Oh, yeah, really tough matchup. Game 3. Let me pop him open real quick. Demario Douglas. Over-under is not great. I mentioned earlier, this isn't a game that I'm targeting relentlessly. The Patriots aren't a team we're expecting touchdowns. So if you're betting on Pop Douglas, then you're betting on catches and yards. You're not expecting touchdowns. Patriots are expected to score just 17.25 points, which is the 5th fewest among all 32 teams this week. Now, they are 7-point underdogs in their own house. We talked about game script. We talked about what that means for receivers, and that means that theoretically the Patriots might have to abandon the run, put the ball in the air. That's a good thing for Patriots pass catchers like Demario Douglas. He missed most of week 7, but it was because he was sick. Like, you should kind of throw week 7 out the window as a weird week where it's just not going to happen again unless he gets sick again later in the year. But what is encouraging is in his first and only full game that he played with Drake May, Demario Douglas caught an encouraging 6 of 9 targets for 92 yards, 1 touchdown, and 21.2 PPR points. So if they're going to throw the ball, which it sounds like they're going to need to, Demario Douglas is likely going to be the top 1 or top 2 beneficiaries of that. So if this is PPR, Justice, I would be definitely looking at Demario. Now, what is frustrating is that the Jets are pretty good against wide receivers. They're holding them to just the 5th fewest PPR points per game, and only 7 wide receivers in 7 games have been able to reach even just 10 PPR points. That's not a lot. That's like, you want to aim for 13, 14, 15, 16 or more. 5 wide receivers in 7 games have been able to reach 15, so that's solid. Two of which scored 22 or more. Now, when you look at the individual level of guys that should have performed and didn't, really that list is limited to just Brandon Ayuk and Jordan Addison, whereas Deebo Samuel, Calvin Ridley, Cortland Sutton, Justin Jefferson, George Pickens, all those guys understood the assignment and did a good job against the Jets. Demario Douglas had his second best game of the season against the Jets this year. This year, his second best game of the season in week 3. He caught 7 of 9 targets for 69, but scoreless yards, 14.8 PPR points. That was with Jacoby Brissett. Ultimately, we're feeling pretty good about Pop Douglas this week, just in general, just in terms of a raw volume. The guy should get targets. He should get catches. He should get yards. Might not find the end zone, but I think it's fair to project him to land in that 11 to 14 PPR point type of range. And then he got Wan'Dale Robinson. Giants against the Steelers. Generally speaking, this is a game that I want to avoid almost anywhere that I can. For starters, the Giants themselves, their implied point total is just 15 points. That is the fewest among all 32 teams on the week. Like, you have all 32 teams and the Giants have the lowest projected total. Okay. So we're definitely not expecting touchdowns from the Giants in week 8. That's a big red flag against Wan'Dale Robinson. I wrote that they're a team to attack with the Steelers defense, not one to put in your offense, except for Malik Neighbors. And that's true. There's not really any Giants that I'd want in my lineup this week, except for Malik Neighbors. The over-under is disgusting. 36.5 points. We're just not expecting a lot of points in this game. And when there's not a lot of points, usually there's not a lot of fantasy points. Good news. The Giants are 6.5 point underdogs. They're going to need to throw the ball. And Wan'Dale Robinson gets tons of targets. I mean, the guy's averaging 9.6 targets per game. Most of it is close to the line of scrimmage, so he's not doing much in the way of yards and touchdowns, but he's getting you 12.4 PPR points per game. That's not bad at all. Now, the Steelers are tough against wide receivers. 11th fewest PPR points per game. Just 7 wide receivers in 7 games have been able to score 10 PPR points, only 3 of which were able to get past 14. Bam, bam, bam. So only 3 wide receivers in 7 games have scored 14 points. Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, Jalen Tolbert, those guys did well against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but Drake London missed, Darnell Mooney missed, Cortland Sutton, CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, all of those guys fell flat on their face when they went up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just not a lot to love about his matchup or anything. So if I'm picking one, I feel the best. Wan'Dale's out. I feel the best about Demario Douglas. The only way that I would pick Ricky Pearsall in this situation, if Debo and Jawan Jennings don't play, both of those guys don't play, it's Ricky, and it's sky's the limit. Like, he could go off. But if Debo Samuel plays, and even if Jawan Jennings doesn't play, I would be going with Demario Douglas, assuming this is a PPR league. If it's not a PPR league, then Pearsall, because he has a better chance of scoring a touchdown. But if it's PPR, Demario's a better bet for targets. So, just to clarify, if the 49ers don't have Debo Samuel or Jawan Jennings, then it's Ricky. But if they do have those guys, or one of those guys, then it's Pop Douglas. Crazy Taco's in the building. What's up, Crazy? What's up, Taco? It's good to see you, man. We're up. So Crazy Taco and I and 200 other fantasy football players are always hanging out in the Discord server. We're literally talking football all day, every day. Where's Crazy Taco? I know you're in. There he is. Oh, I got a gross one for the live show. Oh, you can't see it because this thing's in the way. Let me move this. I got a gross one for the live show. Full PPR, Jerry Jeudy, Sterling Shepard. I'm guessing that's what's going to pop up right here. All right. So anyway, Crazy Taco is in the building. Thanks for being here, buddy. Full PPR, pick one of Jerry Jeudy, Chase Brown, Sterling Shepard, or Wan'Dale Robinson. Yeah, you're right. This is disgusting. All right, we talked about the Browns. Just generally speaking, Browns pass catchers could enjoy a spike in target volume, right? Jerry Jeudy didn't do anything last week, but that's not going to be the case all year. He's the new wide receiver one for a quarterback that is willing to chuck it. Now, it could be Cedric Tillman, but it's probably Jerry Jeudy. Like, first round draft pick, they traded for him. It's most likely going to be Jerry Jeudy. I would feel better about him moving forward, especially better than what we saw from him last week. Chase Brown. We haven't talked Bengals yet. Bengals, who are the Bengals? Oh, yeah. Great game. Great game, but tough matchup, right? Or is it a tough matchup? Dun, dun, dun. Eagles at Bengals has a solid over-under. We feel good about the game. Plenty of touchdowns there. We feel good about the Bengals. Solid implied point total, 25 points. They should get points on the scoreboard. Chase Brown has a good chance of being the guy that helps them do that. They're 2.5-point home favorites. That's narrow. The game could go either way, but it's still not a bad thing for the running back to be on a favored team. Over the last 4 games, Chase Brown is averaging dang near 15 PPR points per game. He's handled 5. That's supposed to say 15. 15 or more touches in 3 of the last 4 games and 12 plus touches in all 4. He scored 14 or more PPR points in 3 of the last 4 games, including a high of 23. He had just 7 points last week, but a reassuring 17 touches. So he's still very much involved. It's not like he's losing his job that he took away from Zach Moss. Now, when you look at the Eagles against running backs, it's a little bit hit and miss. On the one hand, they're holding enemy running backs to the 12th fewest touches, the fewest touchdowns from scrimmage. They're only allowing 0.17 running back touchdowns per game. And as a result, they're holding running backs to the 5th fewest PPR points per game. Now, that being said, they are allowing the 15th most rushing yards, 15th most catches, and 12th most receiving yards per game to opposing running backs. And as I mentioned in the heat map, when you take a defense that's offering 137 scrimmage yards per game, but just 1.17 touchdowns per game, you could argue that the Eagles defense is bound to start letting the floodgates open. They're bound to start letting running backs into the end zone. They could find themselves on the wrong end of touchdown regression sooner than later with the amount of yards that they're giving up, but touchdowns that they're keeping running backs out of the end zone. 5 running backs in the last 5 games have handled 10 to 12 touches against the Eagles with mixed results. 3 of them finished below 10 PPR points, but the other 2 landed between 10 and 13. Not great. 2 other running backs handled 18 touches against the Eagles in weeks 1 and 2, and they scored 12.4 points and 16.2 points along the way. Alvin Kamara handled the whopping 29 touches against them in week 3, but he only managed 15.7 PPR points against them. So they do well against running backs. Bijan Robinson did well. Deontay Foreman did not. Those are the only 2 names that really either clearly hit or clearly missed. So Chase Brown is just kind of, we don't love it, we hope that there's better options out there. Yeah, you're right. This is nasty. Sterling Shepard with the Buccaneers. I mean, that is the ultimate dice roll type of play. We don't know yet who is going to be the guy let me move this down here, in Tampa Bay, with all the injuries, with Mike Evans going down, with Chris Godwin going down. The only one that I feel good about is Cade Otton. I'm going to want more data. I'm going to want to see more from the Buccaneers offense to see, like, my money would be on Jalen McMillan. They spent a 3rd round pick on him for a reason. Sterling Shepard is a guy who's been falling out of the league, but here's what I will say about Sterling Shepard. 31-year-old former 2nd round pick of the Giants. He figures to be heavily involved. He played in 90 career games. Sterling Shepard is averaging 10.5 PPR points and 6.3 targets per game. He scored fewer than 10 PPR points in 50 of those 90 games, which is about 56%, but also 15 or more points in 25 of 90 games. His best years were in 2016 to 2020. He really hasn't been all that relevant since 2020. Trey Palmer is going to be involved. Shepard only played 45% of the Bucs offensive snaps last week, which is behind both Jalen McMillan and Trey Palmer. I would not feel good about. Sterling Shepard is somebody I would want on my bench, but I would want to wait to see what happens before considering him for my lineup. I would rather play Wan'Dale Robinson than Sterling Shepard. But if I had to choose just one of these in a full PPR league, I would likely be like, Chase Brown is definitely the safest option here by far. It's not even close. Like, if you want to roll for safety here, Taco, it's Chase Brown. There's guaranteed touches there. Bengals are going to score points. He has a chance to score a touchdown. He is the safest play. There's plenty of upside to Jerry Jeudy just from a raw volume standpoint, but for me, it's the answer here is Chase Brown. The combination of upside plus floor is better for Chase Brown than anybody else. Jerry Jeudy is very risky. Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, all those guys are risky. Chase Brown is the safest, and there's a decent enough ceiling to stomach. I mean, if you really wanted to swing for the fences, Jerry Jeudy could catch a ton of passes, but to me, it's Chase Brown here. Adam, great question. Are you tracking answers recommendations in a spreadsheet? I wanted to do that last week, and I wrote down the first one and totally forgot the last one. So this, like, I should hire somebody to keep track of what the question is, what my answers are, and what's right, what's not. So that way I can be like, I was 80% right last week, but man, I would love to do that. Steven Soto, 5-2. Nice work, man. Nice job, especially this year. Like, I feel like I say this every year, but injuries are just absolutely crazy. My starting running backs are Brian Robinson and Rashad White. Trade D-Hop and Tracy for Connor. To get James Conner. I think the trade is fine. I think DeAndre Hopkins brings a lot more upside with the Chiefs than I think people realize. I realize Hopkins is older now. He hasn't done much, but they lost Rashee Rice. They lost Marquise Brown. Xavier Worthy has taken a little while to get going. They lost Juju Smith-Schuster for a minute, not for long, but I mean, D-Hop's going to come in and play. Like, he's coming to play. He's playing. He said it himself. He's playing meaningful football. I mean, we've seen this guy still have massive upside as recently as last year. I'm not saying he's going to come in and be a top 10 wide receiver, top 12 wide receiver, but he's going to have bigger weeks than I think people realize. It might take him a minute to get going. James Conner's a really, really rock solid RB2, but he's more than capable of getting scripted out of the game. I would say the trade, Steven, is totally fine. Like, if I saw that trade go through in my league, I wouldn't say, this dude got ripped off. This dude got ripped off. I think the trade itself is even. But I don't know, man. I feel like I would want to hang on to DeAndre Hopkins for a minute, wait till he does something big with Patrick Mahomes, and then aim a little bit higher. I like James Conner, but it's not like this dude's going to come in and win your league. If I'm making a trade, it's usually the sort of thing that I'm either A, trying to save my season and get into the playoffs, or B, I'm trying to put my team over the top and win the whole thing. And I'm not sure James Conner is the guy that does that. So hopefully that helps. Dan B, Other question I have, which quarterback to start this week, Tua or Kirk Cousins? I'm leaning Cousins, but Tampa's injuries, Atlanta might shut it down for the second half if they go up big. I totally get that. That's a big part of the reason I love using Vegas lines is so that I'm getting away from what you just said, Dan. So I'm trying to get away from my gut. And a lot of fantasy players make decisions with their gut, which is fine. I realize that's part of the fun of fantasy football. I try and make my decisions with data. And the data is suggesting that this game's still going to be close. It's only a 2.5 point spread in favor of the Falcons, but it's just 2.5 points. And you got to realize that whether or not the Falcons get up big is a lot of times baked right into this. Like the data suggests the Falcons won't go up big. Now, I'm not saying it's got 100% hit rate. Vegas is wrong, but it's almost scary how correct Vegas lines tend to be. And that's a big part of the reason I like to use them in my decision making. So I wouldn't necessarily be worried about them going up big. But here's what I will say. The data loves Tua this week. If there's a good thing about concussions, it's that they don't have a lingering impact on performance the way that a sprained ankle or a sprained knee or a sprained shoulder, those things can knock players right back out of a game. Like you see all the time, Mike Evans, hamstring, runs a route, boom, he's out of the game. Like you see stuff like that. That's not the case with concussions. Like it doesn't limit their production. Now we can talk all day about whether or not Tua should be on the football field. That's not my decision. He's going to be on the football field and we love him this week. We love the game. It's got a strong over-under, 47.5 points, tied for the fourth highest among all 16 games. Dolphins have a solid implied total of 25.5 points. They're supposed to score touchdowns. This game's got shootout potential written all over it. And Tua's averaging, 17.6 fantasy points per game since Mike McDaniel came to town. He scored 15 or more fantasy points in 15 of 29 games. His only full game that he played this year, he got you 18.6 points. Then you got the Cardinals. They're a great matchup for quarterbacks. They're allowing the 7th most passing yards, 12th most touchdowns, 2nd most rushing yards, and 4th most fantasy points per game. Just 3 have been able to reach 15. Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, and Jordan Love. Those are the only ones that scored 15 points against the Cardinals. But all 3 of them scored at least 22 against Arizona. The ones that missed are Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, Brock Purdy, and Justin Herbert. So some good names there, but not necessarily a shutdown force. If it were me, I would have no hesitation about putting Tua out there. I would be excited about putting Tua out there. I mean, the Dolphins, they're at home. Their fans are going to be desperate for some fireworks after what we've seen over the last 4 weeks. Like, they're going to want to put on a show, fire up Tyreek, fire up Jalen Waddle, and because you're firing up those, fire up Tua. This is a good week to start Tua. Kirk Cousins, fine. There's definitely nothing that's like scary about his matchup. In fact, the Buccaneers are giving up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. He's definitely a usable option, but he has not been consistent this year. He's averaging just 14.1 fantasy points per game. He scored 17 plus in week 2 and then 34 plus against the Buccaneers in week 5. But beyond those 2 games, Kirk has scored fewer than 13 fantasy points in each of the other 5 games that he's played. I would feel better having Tua in my lineup than having Kirk Cousins in there. All right. Hopefully that helps. All right. Trade question here. 12-team full PPR league. I get Devon Achane. Great news with Tua coming back. And Xavier Worthy. I think you see all the time, I shouldn't say all the time, but one of my off-season projects that I intend to work on is rookie wide receivers in the front half of the season. Sorry, my speaker thing just started talking to me. Rookie wide receivers in the front half of the season versus the back half of the season and how they tend to start performing. So I think there's some upside for Xavier Worthy down the back half of the season. So you're getting Devon Achane and Xavier Worthy. I like that. And I don't like giving up Monty. This dude is a legitimate wide RB1 and Najee. I mean, Monty and Achane, you could argue at this point, you could argue that those two are going to be like a horse apiece. Devon Achane was being drafted in the 2nd/3rd round of fantasy drafts this year. And I think we're going to see that explosive ceiling with Tua back. Monty was drafted way too low. He was the steal of drafts all season. There's a reason that I have like 50% exposure to him. in my leagues this year, but he's playing like a legitimate like first round pick. So Monty and Achan are that's pretty even. You're going to see a massive explosive ceiling with Achan, but not as safe of a floor. Montgomery is going to bring you a safer floor and a still nice ceiling. I wouldn't feel any particular way if I logged into my league and I saw Devon Achan and David Montgomery just swapped. I wouldn't feel any particular. I wouldn't be like, whoa, look at this trade. It feels relatively lateral at this point. So then it comes down to Xavier Worthy versus Najee. And in that case, I would rather have Najee. He's starting to pick it up. The touchdown regression is finally starting to hit. He's one of the few running backs in football getting a ton of volume. Oh, I didn't even, I was just about to ask. It depends on what the rest of your team looks like. My team is Mixon, great. So you're strong there. Monty, Najee, Dowdle, Ramondre, Jettas, great. DK, great. Brian Thomas, strong. Tank Dell, Myers, McMillan. You're already really deep at wide receiver. You could use a little bit of depth at running back. I'd be sticking with Monty and Najee here. I would be sticking with those guys. Given the rest of your team, to me, I would want the Monty and the Najee side of this. So hopefully that helps. All right, my guy GQ, Zay Flowers, Dobbs, and Pearsall. I want to check back on Flowers' injury report. I know he was dealing like those ankle injuries. We were just talking about injuries that can knock you back out of the game or limit your effectiveness. That ankle injury. I saw Flowers practice today, so that's a good sign for his availability. But man, Zay Flowers is going to be really tough to trust in a fantasy football lineup this week, especially guys, because the Ravens are 8.5 point favorites. We've already seen games this year where Lamar Jackson threw the ball just 14 times. If the Ravens get up big, it's going to be the Derrick Henry show. My point is they just straight up might not ask much from Zay Flowers. I would not feel good about Zay Flowers. Romeo Dobbs, he would be locked in out of these three for sure. Romeo Dobbs, like I said, I want bits of this game. I want to invest in this game. It's got sneaky shootout potential. Packers are supposed to score a lot of points. Jaguars giving up the fourth most PPR points per game. Romeo Dobbs, people don't recognize because he's not as flashy of a name as Jaden Reed or Christian Watson even, or Dontavian Wicks. Romeo Dobbs plays more offensive snaps than any other Packers wide receiver. He's on the field more than any other wide receiver for the Packers with Jordan Love. He's getting the targets. He's scoring touchdowns. Dobbs would be locked in out of these two. Pearsall, we talked about. If Deebo Samuel and Jawan Jennings both play, Ricky's not an option. Like he's on the bench. He shouldn't even be considered for fantasy football lineups. If Deebo and Jennings are both out, sky's the limit for Ricky. And in this case, I would pick him. Now, the trick is if Deebo plays and Jennings doesn't, Ricky Pearsall would definitely be on the wide receiver 4/flex line there. But can you put him over Zay Flowers? This is one GQ where I would recommend checking back with me on Saturday. For real. Like there's so much information to come down the line in the next 24 hours. Like, is Deebo going to play? Is Jennings going to play? Is Flowers going to play? Like this GQ are they're either not expecting Zay Flowers to play, or B, if they do, they're expecting him to be limited. So, he's a really risky play. I would probably have to go with Pearsall, but I wouldn't feel great about that either. Pearsall's the type where it's like, we know it's going to be Jordan Mason, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and you just hope that whatever scraps fall to Ricky Pearsall. But man, keep an eye on the news over the next 24 hours. We really got to get a sense of how much Zay Flowers is going to play. AFC to the moon says 4-2 team. Congrats. That's awesome. Lamar Jackson, Sam Darnold. Hey, I got that combo. Props. I have that combo in one of my dynasty leagues. Running backs, Brian Robinson, J.K. Dobbins, Jonathan Taylor. Wide receivers, A.J. Brown, London, Reed, Terry. Oh, my Lord. You also got Brian Thomas, Dontavian Wicks, Cedric Tillman, tight end, Tucker Kraft, and Evan Ingram. Wants to know any trades I should look into. So I was just talking to one of my subscribers about this yesterday. I love this question, by the way. My general philosophy with fantasy football is if I'm headed to the playoffs, you got a 4-2 record, looks like you're headed towards the playoffs. I would keep playing things out until you get to the trade deadline or about a week from the trade deadline. And then I would reassess the fantasy football landscape. Were there any injuries? Has anybody else popped up? One of the biggest mistakes I see fantasy football players make is they have a good team and then they want to like convince themselves that they need to stay ahead. So they'll make trades. And then the guy that they trade for gets hurt or trends shift. Like you got to understand the week 8 landscape is going to look a lot different than the week 11 landscape. So I would hang out. I would just hang out for a minute, AFC. And then closer to the trade deadline, I would ask this question again and I would recommend popping closer to the trade deadline. I would recommend popping this question into the trades channel on my fantasy football Discord server so that 200 other fantasy football players can chime in and give you their thoughts on what they think about trades. But right now I would just sit tight, hang out with your team. When it is time to make some trades, I'd be looking for some upgrades at running back big time. You got a lot of wide receivers you can move. Darnold you could move, assuming this isn't a 2-quarterback league. You don't need Darnold if you already have Lamar. I would be eventually looking to trade wide receivers for running backs, but I wouldn't trade for a running back too soon if you're already on your way to the playoffs, because running back is the most injured position in football. You don't want to give up a guy like Terry McLaurin, trade for a running back, and then that dude gets hurt. So I would hang out for a couple weeks. If you are going to trade for a running back, I would trade for some guys that are getting volume but haven't quite performed yet. Najee Harris, Josh Jacobs, etc. Christian McCaffrey. Not exactly. There's a lot of risk there, but hang out just for a couple weeks yet. Keep winning games and then make your punch towards that trade deadline. Kevin Slater wants to know full PPR need two running backs between James Cook, Kareem Hunt, Javonte Williams. Man, just off the top of my head, it would be Javonte and Kareem Hunt. I love both of those guys this week. I already talked about Javonte Williams. Green column, blue dot, love him. Look at that. Right underneath him is Kareem Hunt. There's just a lot to love about the way this sets up for Kareem Hunt. For starters, the Chiefs are expected to score a lot of points, aka touchdowns. Touchdowns are where you get fantasy points. Kareem Hunt has a good chance of being the guy that scores the touchdown. The Chiefs are 9.5-point road favorites, suggesting really positive game script. Fair to wonder how much they'll even need to throw the ball. Kareem Hunt should get as plenty of volume. He's averaging 17.2 PPR points per game, 22.7 touches per game since joining the Chiefs. The Raiders are getting smacked around by running backs. They're allowing a lot, but they're allowing the 8th most PPR points per game. 7 running backs in 7 games have scored at least 15 or more PPR points against the Raiders. Gus Edwards is the only one that failed to meet expectations against the Raiders, while J.K. Dobbins, Derrick Henry, Chuba Hubbard, Jerome Ford, Javonte Williams, Najee Harris, Kyron Williams, all of those guys smashed. I love Javonte Williams this week. I love Kareem Hunt this week. And then as far as Bills, James Cook goes, let me see here. Bills play the Seahawks. Oh, yeah. So generally speaking, that's a game we want exposure to. Matchup is pretty good. Seahawks giving up the 10th most PPR points per game to enemy running backs. I'd feel pretty good about the Buffalo Bills and the running backs this week, but sorry, I'm totally like losing focus here. What game is this? Game 11. Let's scroll down here, find James Cook. Oh yeah, first game back from a toe injury last week, just 12 touches, still battling that toe injury. He's averaging 15.6 PPR points per game. He's also scored fewer than 14 points in the other 3 of 6 games, including 2 games under 10 PPR points. Seahawks are a good matchup. The script is nice. It could shoot out, but just the way that this game sets up so beautifully for Javonte Williams and Kareem Hunt, I'd be going with Javonte Williams and Kareem Hunt. It's just all of the data just works out so beautifully, so perfectly for both of those guys. Jordan wants to know, who are 1 to 2 guys you're high on this week that could be sneaky upside plays in DFS? My favorite thing to do when I'm looking for those guys is look at the blue column of the heat map. So if you're in the blue column of the heat map, that means every bit of data suggests big week is coming. Like The game script looks good. The matchup looks good. They're trending in the right direction. There's literally nothing that looks bad about the way the game sets up for them. Brees Hall is a good example. Look at the blue dots. Cooper Kupp was an example. He scored a touchdown yesterday. Tyreek Hill should wheels up in that matchup. Tua Tagovailoa's back. AJ Brown, Jaden Reed, J.K. Dobbins. You asked for some sneaky upside plays. Obviously, Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, those aren't sneaky. Those are very loud, but like it's J.K. Dobbins week again. He's teed up for a big week. Javonte Williams is teed up for a big week. Kareem Hunt, Jordan Mason, lots of running backs that we really, really, really like this week. So I always recommend looking at the blue and green dots when you're looking at, generally speaking, if they have a blue dot or they have a green dot, that means there's big time upside for that player in the heat map. I haven't done this at all yet. If you guys want to give the heat map a try when you're setting your lineups in week 8, I just dropped a link in the comments section where you can grab it. The week 8 heat map costs less than one beer. It's $4.99, or you can get the remainder of the 2024 season all the way through the Super Bowl. Like, this doesn't stop at week 17 for me. I create these until the Super Bowl is over. You can get the rest of the 2024 package at just $2.79 per heat map. It's like $38, $39, something like that. And you get every single heat map for the rest of the year. Visit the shop in my Patreon, or just use the link that I just dropped in the comments. And then what we're looking at, what we're using, is all yours. You can use it as much as you want. All right, next question. KJ Frederick wants to know, I have K. Dotton as my tight end this week. Nice. I dig that. I roster Kamani Vidal as JK's handcuff. Should I drop Vidal for Taysom Hill as a bench stash, or keep Vidal as Jacob's handcuff? Full PPR. So I'm really glad you asked this, KJ. I am anti-handcuff. And I'm more... So here's the thing about handcuffing running backs is I think the term handcuff is appropriate because you're handcuffing your own upside when you're handcuffing running backs, meaning you're using valuable bench space on a running back who only becomes valuable if your current running back gets hurt, in which case, no matter what, it's a downgrade. If you lose Dobbins and you have Vidal, that's not a good thing. Like, it's good that you have Vidal to fall back on, but your upside is completely capped. And the way to smash fantasy football leagues is to maximize upside at every level, not just in the starting lineup, but on your bench. If you have an opportunity to grab somebody else's handcuffs, that is how you absolutely dominate. So, for example, on my heat map at the bottom, there is a tab called Streamer. There's other tabs here. There's a touchdown regression tab, which shows you mathematically which players are most likely to score touchdowns in the upcoming weeks. But there's also streamers and stashes tabs. If you're looking for a defense you can plug and play off waivers, kickers that you can plug and play. I'm working on a really cool kicker research project to better project kickers that are going to perform. If you're looking for tight end streamers, quarterback streamers, and players to stash, on this tab, like guys like Jonathan Brooks, should be rostered way more than he is. That's not even a handcuff. That's a potential starting running back. But if you can get Zach Charbonnet, Tyler Algier, Damian Pierce, Ty Chandler, Kamani Vidal is on this list, but you already have Dobbins. If you can instead roster Ty Chandler, Ray Davis, Braylon Allen, rostering somebody else's handcuff is how you maximize upside, because that way, let's say you're rostering Ty Chandler and J.K. Dobbins is healthy and then Aaron Jones gets hurt. Now, all of a sudden, you have J.K. Dobbins and you have the RB2 for the Minnesota Vikings. Whereas Vidal is only valuable once you've already suffered the gut punch of losing one of your own. So I'm more than fine with dropping Kamani Vidal, and I'm more than fine with rostering Taysom Hill. Dude's an absolute cheat code when it comes to being a tight end and tight end eligible. I would make sure he's rostered regardless. But generally speaking, I'm totally fine with dropping my handcuff running back to pick up somebody else's handcuff. And if you need help identifying those, I got them all listed here from top to bottom in the week 8 heat map. Again, you guys can get the heat map $4.99. It's in the shop on my Patreon, or you can get them for $2.79 per heat map in the shop on my Patreon. Vincent wants to know, Tank Bigsby, Romeo Dobbs, or Khalil Shear at flex. I would definitely be going Dobbs over Bigsby. Just the way that the game sets up, shootout, pass friendly, great matchup. Dobbs is on the field. Bigsby's a little bit of a trap. If the Jaguars fall behind the Packers and fall behind early, Bigsby is a risk of not getting enough volume to pay fantasy football dividends. Khalil Shakir is a very low upside option. The game is fine. Bills at Seahawks, nice shootout, nice matchup. But to me, the answer here is Romeo Dobbs, and I feel pretty confident about that one. Daco wants to know, I traded Chase Brown away for Pacheco. Woo! What do you think? I'm 4-2 with a very strong team. I love it, man. Absolutely love it. Chase Brown's great, but he's just a guy. It's not like he's going to like take over and run away. You're not going to win your fantasy football league on Chase Brown. Isaiah Pacheco, man, I mean, I don't think Kareem Hunt just goes away when Isaiah Pacheco comes back, but I'm totally fine with this trade. I don't think you're going to find many people that would disagree going from a healthy Chase Brown to a healthy Isaiah Pacheco. That's not a downgrade. That's an upgrade. And you're already 4-2. So you have the luxury of being able to trade a right now player for a future player. I love that. One of my favorite strategies in fantasy football when I do have a winning team is to look at players that are reeling in the standings. Like, are there 1-7 teams, 2-5 teams, 3-4 teams that are struggling to get into the playoffs? Those are typically the teams that are feeling maybe a little bit desperate and willing to make a move. I love the idea of bolstering an already good team by giving away a player that can help them in the short term. Diego wants to know, bro, do I start Tua or Russell? Tua, man. Russell balled out last week, but that game in particular, like that game is nasty. Giants Steelers, look at this, 36.5 point over under. The Steelers are projected to score just 21 points. Then you got the Dolphins in a possible shootout. This game has an over under that's 10 points higher than Steelers Giants. Dolphins have a 4 point higher implied point total. Great matchup for Tua against the Cardinals, who are allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game. Give me Tua, man. It's wheels up. If the Dolphins don't score 90 points this week, we riot. Okay. If you have Tua, you got Tyreek, you got Waddle, get those guys in there. KJ, better flex start, David Montgomery or Jawan Jennings? Always Montgomery. Always Montgomery. In this situation, I know it's full PPR. The only Jennings would have appeal if Deebo Samuel wasn't playing, but Jennings himself is hurt. He might not even play. So Monty for me. Yep. Diego's with me on that one. Should I get rid of Kamara for Adams? I would never recommend getting rid of Kamara, and I wouldn't trade him for Devontae Adams. I think Adams is going to have a great back half of the year, but I also think Kamara is going to have a great back half of the year, especially when I almost said Derrick Henry, when Derek Carr returns. I wouldn't do that. I'd stick with Kamara. PPR, Chase Brown or Rico Dowdle? Man, Rico Dowdle was starting to run away with the RB1 job in Dallas, and then all of a sudden, like, Zeke got involved again in week 6. I don't think anybody in Dallas knows what they're doing. Not a lot to love about Rico Dowdle this week. Cowboys are 4.5 point underdogs. The matchup is fine. The 49ers are giving up the 13th most fantasy points per game, but it's just like, there's just not a lot to love about Rico Dowdle. He's doing fine. The 49ers are holding running backs to the 9th fewest rushing yards. 4 running backs in 7 games have scored 15 or more PPR points against them. It's just, I don't know. There's just not a lot to love there. Chase Brown, I would be going with Chase Brown here. The Bengals are favored. The Eagles matchup has proven that it's not as scary as it looks on paper when you see that they're holding running backs to the 5th fewest PPR points per game. There's actually more vulnerability there than people realize. Bengals expected to score more points. Chase Brown, has a better chance of scoring a touchdown than Rico Dowdle does. Don't get me wrong. I don't love either one of these guys. Like, I'm not like, oh yeah, we got to get Chase Brown in there. Yeah, we got to get Rico Dowdle in there. I don't love either one. And it's probably like a 55 to 45% decision here. But I would, if it were me if I was setting my own lineup with this decision, I'd be going with Chase Brown. Jim says, your analysis is incredible. I literally just felt a pitter patter in my heart when you said that, Jim. I really appreciate that, man. Thank you. Listen, full disclosure, guys, I had whatever, man. I'll share. Grown men can share. Okay. I'm not ashamed to admit to you guys that I quite literally cried this morning. I don't know. I just one of my subscribers canceled, and I was just having a tough morning of like, I don't know, running this business is hard. It's so much harder to quote unquote sell people or get subscribers than people realize, and you work your butt off. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm just explaining what happened. It was like, man, you work so hard and then it's so hard to find subscribers and then it's so easy to lose one. So really, honest to God, stuff like this, stuff like Dan's comment, new subscriber right here. I really appreciate you guys. Like that means more to me, especially today with the emotional day that I've had, than I can actually say to you guys. I feel weird telling you guys that like I cried today, but it's like, whatever, man. We're all human. It happens. I hope my son knows that it's okay to have your moments. It was a rough morning. And big shout out to my wife. I have no idea if she's tuned in, but I had a good FaceTime phone call with her at work, and she really kind of picked me up off the ledge a little bit. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you. Let's keep it rolling. Well, I'll get away from the soft stuff for a minute here. He was chiming. Pix Del Cappy was chiming in on somebody else's thing. He thinks Tank Bigsby over Cedric Tillman. Alekos wants to know, and I apologize if I pronounce that wrong. Do I give Juwan Jennings for Chase Brown? I only have 2 running backs. I have Amari, DK Neighbors, Flowers, Douglas. Yeah, I would 100% do this trade, Alekos. Like, you're already set at running back. You're not going to have DK for a while, but that sucks. But you're fine. And Malik Neighbors is going to be locked into your lineup every single week. You can't bench the target volume that he's getting. Amari Cooper is going to get better and better with that offense as I go. I'm not expecting him to like go all Stephon Diggs, just to be clear about that, but he's going to be solid. DK has been great this year, so once we get him back, you'll be set. Demario Douglas is great with Drake May. Juwan Jennings, I know he had that 40-plus point week a couple weeks ago, but he's still going to be third, if not fourth in line behind Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey. Totally fine with trading away Juwan Jennings, getting a little bit of depth with Chase Brown. Totally cool with that. Jim Welke, teams don't need to throw against the Jets. They just keep it on the ground. Yeah. I mean, the Jets, it's no secret that the offense hasn't been putting a lot of points. They just, don't turn it over and you're in contention against the Jets so far. Fortnite Gamer says Giants are garbage. I mean, that's, it hasn't been pretty. That's for sure. You heard it here first. All right, guys. Pixdale Cappy's calling a shot. Tank Bigsby over Saquon Barkley. I don't know if you're saying season long or if you're saying this week. It's an interesting take, but you did hear it here first. I have not heard that somewhere else. Daniel Akins wants to know, 12-team half PPR league. Do I flex Tolbert, Douglas, or Tracy? I would eliminate Tyrone Tracy. He's going to be he's in a timeshare with Devin Singletary. The Giants they're 5.5 point underdogs. They have an implied total under 16 points. Tough matchup. Steelers holding running backs to the 9th fewest PPR points per game. So I would eliminate Tracy. Honest to goodness, Malik Neighbors is the only New York Giant I would even consider for my lineup in week 8. So that leaves Jalen Tolbert, and Demario Douglas, and it's a half PPR. Because it's half PPR, I would be going with Jalen Tolbert because Jalen Tolbert is still going to be the wide receiver 2 for the Cowboys. Brandon Cooks is not ready to return yet. This game does have some sneaky shootout potential. 47.5 point over under. The 49ers have been pretty tough against wide receivers this year, but so have the Jets, which is who Demario Douglas is going against. Ultimately, the Cowboys have an implied point total of 21.5 points. They're theoretically going to be playing from behind, so they'll need to throw the ball. The Patriots will be playing from behind and need to throw the ball too, but they only have an implied point total of 17.25 points in an equally tough matchup. Jalen Tolbert has a better likelihood, a better chance of scoring a touchdown than Demario Douglas does, and that matters in a half PPR league. If this was full PPR, you could certainly make the case for Douglas because dude should continue to rack up targets, although Jalen Tolbert, I believe, had a 10-target game not too long ago himself. So there's just more upside for Jalen Tolbert this week while Brandon Cooks is out. I'd be going with Tolbert here. All right. Sebastian wants to know, would you trade Brock Purdy and Tank Dell for Jamison Williams and Jordan Love? No, I wouldn't. I think, well, hold on. Yes. Let me change that. Yes. I was thinking this week for a second there because Tank Dell I like this week. Jameson Williams isn't even going to play this week. But yeah, I'm totally fine with that. It's an upgrade at quarterback. Theoretically, it's an upgrade at wide receiver. Once Nico Collins comes back, Tank Dell hasn't, even without Nico Collins, Tank Dell hasn't been doing all that much. So I'm fine with upgrading at both positions. Oh no. Hello, the link of this week 8 heat map is not working. Only the full season heat map. Picks. Let me give me 1 second here. It should be, let me pop over. So it's right here. The week 8, here's the week 8 heat map. It's in the shop. Here, I'll just actually grab the actual link if I can. You should be able to copy this link. I'm going to drop it in the comments section here real quick. So the link that I just shared in the comments, that should take you to get just the week 8 heat map. It's not going to give you the full season, but if you're looking for just week 8, it's $4.99. It's in the link that I just shared. If you're not seeing it for some reason, go to patreon.com/basementbroodff/shop, and it'll be right there. So hopefully that helps. Let me know if not, because that'd be really frustrating if you're wanting to get the heat map and it's not working. So thank you for bringing that to my attention, Picks. iRevives says, who do I start as my RB2 this week? ETN, Bigsby, or Bucky? Man, ETN is so risky with that hamstring injury. Oh, man, I really don't like this one. That hamstring injury is risky. Like, I tend to try and stay away from hamstrings if I ever have an opportunity. We saw what happened with Mike Evans last week. The way that this game sets up, though, if you're comparing ETN versus Bigsby, ETN is a better play than Tank Bigsby is in the way that this game sets up. The Jaguars are expected to be playing from behind, right? They're 3.5-point underdogs, expected to be playing from behind, meaning theoretically they might need to throw the ball. That benefits Travis Etienne more than it benefits Tank Bigsby. But again, man, that hamstring injury is very, very, very concerning. I personally would not feel good about putting Travis Etienne in my lineup this week. It's so risky, and the upside might not be worth the risk. Tank Bigsby, it's hard to see a lot of upside there because they're going to be playing from behind. It might be more of a Travis Etienne, D'Ernest Johnson type of day. Although, if the Jaguars are going to score 23 or more points and get near the end zone, Tank Bigsby is likely the guy they're going to hand the ball to. So we do like that. Now, as for Bucky Irving, going up against the Falcons, really brutal matchup. We don't love the game. The over-under's fine, 45.5. It's mediocre. It's right in the middle compared to other teams. The Buccaneers have a subpar implied total of just 21.5 points. We're not expecting a lot of touchdowns there. Bucky Irving, he's stuck in a three-headed committee now. It's not just Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. Now it's also got Sean Tucker in there. He had 11 or 12 touches in 5 of 6 games. He's just barely RB3 flex worthy right now. Those other guys just have more upside. The Falcons are tough on running backs. Unfortunately, I would not feel good about any of these guys being in my lineup. I'm wondering if there's anybody else in your lineup, maybe somebody you can plug and play off waivers. There are a lot of options in here, Revives, in the heat map that maybe you can plug and play off waivers. What I'll say is keep an eye on injury reports, or if you're signed into my Discord server, keep an eye on the player news channel. If we start talking about Travis Etienne, keep an eye on injury reports on whether or not Travis Etienne is A, going to play, and B, play a full complement of snaps, because if he's going to play and be unlimited, he is definitely the answer to this question. But if he's going to be limited, then I would be going with Tank Bigsby and just hoping and praying he finds his way into the end zone. There's not a way to feel good about any of those, unfortunately. Armando said, just liked and subscribed. Really appreciate you, brother. Honestly, thank you so much. That means I can't tell you guys how hard it is to build not just the business, but build the audience, get followers. It's wild how challenging it is. So really, I appreciate it. He wants to know for the flex, Tyler is it Algier, or I always say Algier, but I don't know. Tyron Tracy, Wicks, or Shepard, or drop one for Christian Watson or Bateman. Ooh, baby. Okay. Tracy's out. Not like don't drop Tracy, but this week I'm not interested in Tracy or pretty much anybody on the Giants that isn't Malik Neighbors. Shepard is a guy that I would rather wait and see. He didn't even play 50% of the snaps last week. Granted, Chris Godwin played almost that whole game, so there's not really a reason for Shepard to play full snaps, but still, we don't know if it's going to be McMillan. We don't know if it's going to be Trey Palmer, who played a ton of snaps. We don't know if it's going to be Shepard. We do know it's going to be Cade Otton. Kidding, but I think it will be. Dontavian Wicks, I mean, he's as boom bust as it gets at wide receiver because he's sharing the Packers deep threat role with Christian Watson. So it's like you ask about dropping one of them for Christian Watson. I mean, I'd be fine with dropping Dontavian Wicks for Christian Watson because Watson's at least playing more snaps. He's on the field just a little bit more than Dontavian Wicks, but ultimately those guys are playing the same role. So it's almost a lateral move if you go from Dontavian Watson to Christian Watson. Tyler Algier is not an option if Bijan Robinson's playing. He just doesn't get the volume. So to me, it comes down to Wicks/Watson or Bateman. Bateman would have some appeal if Zay Flowers doesn't play, but even then, I mentioned earlier in the show that we've already seen games where Lamar Jackson throws the ball literally 14 times, and the Ravens are 9.5 point. Where'd it go? 8.5 point favorites against the Browns. There's really theoretically, I mean, they should run the ball 40, 50 times in this game. They just theoretically won't have to throw the ball all that much. So Bateman is really tough to trust considering he's only getting 4 or 5 targets per game as is. And if we're going to see a lessened passing value game, there's just not a lot to love there. So to me, it comes down to flipping a coin and choosing which Packers wide receiver you want. Christian Watson is playing not much, but a little bit more snaps than Dontavian Wicks. So I personally would pick Watson over Wicks, if that helps. And then the guy that I would drop is, I guess Wicks. There's no reason to roster both of those guys. So I would drop Wicks. It really is a coin toss, Armando. It's like 51 to 49%. It's not like it's like 60 to 40 or anything like that. It's 51 to 49 in favor of Christian Watson, only because he's playing more snaps. He's on the field more than Dontavian Wicks is. Aliko says, you are the most comprehensive analysis channel I've seen so far. Subscribed and may buy the heat map. How do you pronounce it? Alikos? Either way, man, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Seriously, these are words that I really, really needed to hear today. Like I took last week off because I was just feeling beat up. This morning I was feeling beat up. So this stuff, I cannot tell you how much this stuff means to me. Thank you. Thank you so much. Seriously. Thank you. Justice Reborn, full PPR, Bucky, Goodson, Ray Davis, or Isaac Guerendo. Guerendo's not an option while Jordan Mason plays. Bucky, Goodson. Last I saw, Jonathan Taylor's practicing in full, so I think he's going to play. So if Jonathan Taylor plays, Goodson's not an option, and Guerendo wouldn't be an option either. Ray Davis is hard to get behind while James Cook is active, only because he's just not getting the same type of volume. Although, if you know me, you know I love Ray Davis. Like, I loved him coming out of the draft. I loved him when the Bills drafted him. I wrote a lot about. I've talked ad nauseum on this very channel about Ray Davis and the Bills, but when James Cook is on the field, or at least when James Cook has been on the field, Ray Davis is just straight up not getting the volume. In fact, I'd even have him in the F column, meaning you can read what it says. The F column means I wouldn't even consider them for my lineup because he's just not getting volume. The only guy in this list that is getting volume that can actually work out in week 8 is Bucky. Now, Ray Davis is balling when he gets the chance. Like, you hand him the ball and he makes magic happen. He's just not getting the chances. So I would be going with Bucky Irving over all of these guys because he's the only one getting us 10 to 11 to 12 touches every single time he's on the football field. That changes if Jonathan Taylor does not play. It changes if for some reason James Cook's toe injury gets worse and he doesn't play. But for me, it's Bucky Irving. Mr. Patrick wants to know, start Dak or Kirk? Ooh, that's a tough one. Well, let's Good thing that's what this heat map is for, right? All right, let's talk about Dak first. Now, again, generally speaking, we want pieces of this game. 47.5 point over under, although the Cowboys implied point total is not great. 21.5. Perfectly fine QB1-2 play in week 8. Subpar implied total. He's averaging 15 points per game. He did score 16 or more fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. He had a high of 29.8 in week 3. That said, he has also scored fewer than 13 fantasy points in 3 of 6 games, including a low of 3.2 his last time out on the field against the Lions, who, yeah, he should have done better there. 49ers, not a great matchup for quarterbacks. They're holding them to the 14th fewest passing yards, 11th fewest passing touchdowns, and 13th fewest fantasy points per game. They're allowing the 15th most rushing yards and 9th most rushing touchdowns, so that's cool. Dak Prescott can take advantage of that. 5 QBs in 7 games have scored fewer than 13 fantasy points against the Niners. Not good. The other 2 scored 19 or more, including 24.1 from Kyler Murray. Sam Darnold and Kyler Murray did well against the Niners, but Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, Jacoby Brissett, Geno Smith, and Patrick Mahomes all fell short. Meanwhile, Kirk Cousins, he's been equally hit or miss as Dak Prescott. Like, he's either having big games or terrible games. Generally speaking, the game itself is kind of mediocre. The Falcons have a slightly higher than average implied point total of 24. The over-under is it's 45.5. That's not bad. It's just not this sky-high over-under. But remember, the Falcons versus the Bucs went for 66 points just a few weeks ago in week 5. Like, there is some high-scoring potential here. Kirk Cousins is averaging 14.1 fantasy points per game. He's been all over the place. He scored 17.5 in week 2, 34.6 in week 5 against these very same Buccaneers, by the way. But beyond those 2 games, Kirk Cousins has scored fewer than 13 fantasy points in each of the other 5 games he's played with the Falcons, including 3 games under 10 points. Now, I want to call attention to this. Like I already mentioned it, he scored 36.4 fantasy points against these very same Tampa Bay Buccaneers just a few weeks ago in week 5. But here, right here, is arguably the most important part about that. The Atlanta Falcons dialed up 58 pass attempts against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't a mistake. That is a game plan strategy designed by the Atlanta Falcons. And it makes sense because look at what happens to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when quarterbacks get a chance to go against them. They're allowing the 4th most passing yards, 8th most passing touchdowns. They're even giving up the 3rd most rushing yards and most rushing touchdowns. Ultimately, the 2nd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. 5 quarterbacks in 7 games have scored 18 or more fantasy points against the Bucs, including 3 that scored more than 28. Jaden Daniels did well. Bo Nix did well. Jalen Hurts, Kirk Cousins, Lamar Jackson, Jared Goff, and Spencer Rattler are the only 2 that missed the mark against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year. So when you realize, okay, Kirk Cousins threw 58 passes, 509 yards. The Atlanta Falcons made a conscious decision to put the ball in Kirk Cousins' hands and let him do his thing, and he did his thing. He smashed against the Bucs. If I were making this decision, I would be going with Kirk Cousins over Dak Prescott. Most weeks, I would not make that decision, but this week, I'd be going Kirk over Dak. Patrick wants to know, I have an open roster spot. Pick up Braylon Allen, Xavier Legette, or Drake May. I feel like if May actually has a good game, it will startable rest of the season. If this is a 1 quarterback league, Patrick, I wouldn't waste bench space on another quarterback or like Drake. I wouldn't roster more than 1 if it's a 1 quarterback league. Legette is getting playing time, but Adam Thielen is coming back. I definitely I don't want any Panthers receivers this week. I would be picking up Braylon Allen. Typically speaking, I want to use my bench space on running backs that become instant RB2s with RB1 upside if the guy in front of them goes down or if the depth chart flips or something like that. Braylon Allen is, if you go to my streamers and stashes tab, Braylon Allen is pretty high on that list. He looks like he's the 8th name down. If anything ever happened to Breece, I almost said Breece Young. If anything ever happens to Breece Hall, Braylon Allen would be an instant RB2 with occasional RB1 upside. He's a much, much better bench stash than any of these other ones that you've listed, for sure. Don't worry, this is my wife. Like, that's awesome. Dana, it's 1:50, which means you're currently watching. Thank you. Our chat earlier, our FaceTime earlier was it. I needed it more than I realized I did. So thank you for. I still don't even know what you wanted when you called because I dominated the conversation, but I appreciate you, babe. Thank you so much. Can't wait to hang out with you tonight. Maybe we'll play our new video game tonight. That'd be fun. All right. Justice Reborn. Just wanted to add, appreciate the in-depth analysis. You are awesome. We'll look to support and buy your heat maps. Justice, man, I really appreciate you, dude. You guys are gonna make me cry again. Like what a day. What a day. What a roller coaster of emotion. I mean, a glass case of emotion. Basement of emotion. Justice, really appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Fett wants to know drop two. Oh, this is an interesting one. Why? Are you adding somebody? That's what I want to know. Drop two. Ladd, Mooney. You can't drop Mooney. Leggett, Keon Coleman, or Ricky Pearsall. No. Pass. I refuse. I will not drop two. Thank you, though. Thanks for asking. Drop two. It's hard to drop Ladd McConkey because he's the number one wide receiver for the Chargers. But being the number one wide receiver in a Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh offense is not like, that's not this. I think the best we ever saw, I don't think my brain is serving me right. I think the best we've ever seen from a wide receiver in a Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman offense, I believe Michael Crabtree finished as Fantasy's wide receiver 15. I don't remember which year, but I think that's the absolute best we've ever seen from a Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh wide receiver 1. I'm totally fine with dropping Ladd McConkey. Like, he's getting 6-ish targets per game in an offense that will never throw the ball if they don't have to. Like, if they can just run the ball every time, they will. And even if they do throw, McConkey's number 1, but they got Quentin Johnston, who's had a little bit of a revival year. They still have Josh Palmer. DJ Chark is going to enter the mix sooner than later. Like, Ladd McConkey is not a guy I need to have on my roster. Darnell Mooney is getting a ton of targets. This dude's getting like 7 targets per game. I wouldn't drop him if I don't have to. The Falcons are going to find themselves in pass-heavy game scripts and situations. I wouldn't drop him if I don't have to. Really hesitant to drop Keon Coleman because Coleman profiles as one of those guys that does nothing in the first half of the year and then strings together a bunch of really nice performances in the back half of the year once something clicks in his rookie season. I mean, we saw Rashee Rice is not a good example because he served as the team's wide receiver 1 last year. But for the first half of the season, people might forget Rashee Rice did nothing for the Chiefs last year. I don't want to go down that road. Keon Coleman is not Rashee Rice. It's not the same talent, not the same situation. I'm just saying that we see wide receivers struggle in the first half and then turn it on in the second half. So I'd be reluctant to drop Keon Coleman, especially with Amari Cooper coming in to take away some of the defensive pressure. But still, it's not like Dalton Kincaid is going to go anywhere. It's not like Khalil Shakir is going to fall off the face of the earth. Ultimately, I don't want to drop Keon Coleman, but I'd be okay with dropping Keon Coleman. Xavier Leggett is getting a lot more playing time. That offense looks so much better when Andy Dalton's in there, but Adam Thielen's coming back, although he's, been the subject of trade rumors. It would make all the sense in the world for them to trade him. Like, why would you not trade the 32-year-old receiver when you're clearly in a rebuilding mode? And then Ricky Pearsall, man. I mean, there's an opportunity for him to be the wide receiver 2 moving forward, filling Brandon Ayuk's shoes. But Juwan Jennings isn't like, he's a pest. The 49ers have loved Juwan Jennings for years. It's a matter of, do they want to get their rookie on the field or not? This one is really tough. This one is way more difficult than it should be because you don't really want to drop any of these guys and they're all Fett. Like, I can't emphasize enough. All of these guys are like neck and neck. It's not like, oh yeah, definitely get rid of him. All of these guys I could see dropping. I think when you think of long-term upside, we're never going to get a massive ceiling from Ladd McConkey. It's just not going to happen. I'm not saying in his career. I'm saying this year. He's not going to suddenly turn into this like 15 to 20 PPR point type of guy. I would, if you're at a point where you're needing to have Ladd in your lineup, your things aren't going well to begin with. So I'm okay with dropping Ladd. Mooney is going to be one of those, like, he's going to have big games. He's going to have duds. X is always, he's never going to be the guy over Deontay Johnson this year. Who knows how long it's Bryce Young. If I'm dropping two, I'm dropping Ladd McConkey and Xavier Legette. Because there's a lot of upside to Keon Coleman. There's a lot of upside to Ricky Pearsall. And we've already seen the upside from Darnell Mooney. Those other two guys, Legette and Ladd, are like, things would need to break unbelievably right. Patrick, I really appreciate the in-depth analysis. Just liked and subscribed. Patrick, I really, really, really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Just found you and subscribed. Love what I'm hearing from your analysis. Man, you guys, I love you guys. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Chase says, pick one, Pollard, Wicks, or Chase Brown. Dude, Tony Pollard was on my do not start list last week. He's on my do not start list this week. Titans are 11.5-point underdogs. Like, that is, Vegas thinks the Titans are going to get absolutely destroyed by the Lions. And if that happens, let me pull up. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Just give me 1 second. I'm pulling up last week's heat map, the week 7 heat map, because I want to reference something I wrote about Tony Pollard last week when they went against or not. I promise the heat map doesn't look like this blank thing. Internet's all right. Here we go. Titans, Bills. Here we go. Tony Pollard last week. There's one very specific. Here we go. When the Titans lost by 2 scores when they lost by 16 points in week 3, right? So more than 1 touchdown. They needed 2 touchdowns in week 3. Why am I saying it that way? When they lost by 2 scores in week 3, Tony Pollard suffered a season low 9 touches and 5.9 PPR points per game. For comparison, Tony Pollard has 19 or more touches in each of the other 4 games he's played this year, all of which were games that the Titans either won or lost by 1 score or less. Okay? Meaning, in games that the Titans are competitive, games that they win or games that they just barely lose, Tony Pollard gets a ton of volume, and he's a great fantasy football play. In the games that the Titans get whooped, he was limited to so where was it? When in week 3 they got smoked by my Green Bay Packers. Yeah, I remember. And he had just 9 touches that game. So the point is, in games where they are projected to lose big, Tony Pollard is really, really risky. And in this game, 11.5-point underdogs. Tony Pollard is not somebody I would want in my lineup this week. I like him moving forward, but not this week. And oh yeah, by the way, the Lions are holding running backs to the second fewest PPR points per game. He would need to move mountains for it to work out. So then we move on to Dontavian Wicks or Chase Brown. What it really is going to come down to here, Chase, is if you want safety, quote unquote safety, which there's no such thing in fantasy football, but safety or upside. Chase Brown is guaranteed to get the football. He's guaranteed to get at least 10 touches, more likely 15-ish touches. The Eagles aren't as terrifying of a matchup as their number suggests, right? You'll see anywhere you look that they're holding running backs to the 5th fewest PPR points per game. That's kind of scary. But we talked about earlier in the episode that it's not as scary as people think, because they are allowing the 15th most rushing yards, 15th most catches, and 12th most receiving yards per game. The reason that they've been so scary is they're straight up not allowing touchdowns, just 0.17 running back touchdowns per game. But they are allowing a ton of rushing yards. And usually where there's smoke, there's fire. Usually where one thing happens, the other thing follows. Meaning, eventually, if you give up this many rushing yards, touchdowns are going to start to follow. So the Eagles could find themselves on the wrong end of touchdown regression sooner rather than later. And the Bengals have a nice implied total, 25 points. They should score touchdowns in this game, and Chase Brown is as good a bet as anybody to be on the receiving end of some of those touchdowns. So he's going to be a safer pick than Dontavian Wicks. But Wicks is just going to have a ton of upside because he's entering the shootout, 49.5-point over-under. Packers are expected to score a lot of touchdowns. Jaguars are giving up the fourth most PPR points per game. He is not at all a safe play. He's not getting a ton of targets. Now that the Packers receiving core is healthy, they got Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, all of those guys are playing. So Dontavian Wicks is not getting a ton of targets. He's not even playing 50% of the Packers offensive snaps because he is stuck behind those other three guys. He just has a lot of upside. He's about as boom or bust as it gets. So Chase, if you went against Justin Jefferson or Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp yesterday, and you feel like, okay, man, I need a ton of upside, I need to swing for the fences, Dontavian Wicks. But if you're looking at your opponent, you're looking at your lineups and saying, I just need to guarantee myself 10-ish points, guarantee, then Chase Brown is going to be the safer play. So figure out what you need, safety versus upside, and go that route. Like Dontavian Wicks could get you 0, but he could get you more than 20. Chase Brown will get you, he might only get you like 9 or 10, but he might also get you like 16 or 17. So figure out what makes sense there. All right, guys, couple more, and then I got to sign off. My back is killing me. Aliko says, someone sent me a trade which involves me giving up Breece for Tyreek and Brian Robinson. Whew. Like I said before, I'm set at wide receiver, but lack running back depth. Maybe trade value. So, yeah, I mean, the trade itself is actually fine. Like, Breece for Tyreek with Tua under center, Tyreek is we know. I don't need to go into it. Tyreek is a league-winning wide receiver if Tua is playing football. There's a reason he was a top 3 draft pick this year. So Tyreek for Breece alone, totally even, totally fair. I'd be fine with that trade, especially because you're getting Brian Robinson in return. Brian Robinson's been great this year. He's averaging like 14, 15 PPR points per game. He's a huge beneficiary of the Washington Commanders taking a massive step forward on offense under Jaden Daniels. So the trade in a vacuum is a great trade. It really is. The problem, like you said, is that you're set at wide receiver and you're lacking depth. So you would need to make more than just one trade. If you're going to trade away the piece that you're already missing, which is running back, and you're going to bring in the piece where you're already strong, that's fine. But you need to be ready to continue to play the game and ship off one of those other wide receivers. So if you bring in Tyreek, ship off the next guy for a running back. But as far as value goes, this value is great. Like Tyreek about to Tyreek. Pix wants to know Bo Nix, Dak, or Goff. Bo Nix, I joked in the streamers category or streamers channel of my Discord server just yesterday. I said, Bo Nix looking like a high quality streamer for week 8. And then I joked with a couple known Broncos fans in the Discord server. Shed a tear, GQ and Kevin. They're Broncos fans. But yeah, I like Bo Nix a lot this week. The Broncos are expected to score 25.5 points. Like that is a really healthy implied point total for the Broncos. They're going up against the Panthers, so that explains that. But still, that definitely puts Bo Nix on the radar. The Panthers have struggled against quarterbacks. Bo Nix has been balling. Like he's been doing. Let me pop him up real quick. That's number 13, Bo Nix here. So where is it? He's averaging. On the season, he's averaging 14.8 PPR, 14.8 fantasy points per game. But over the last 5 games, he's averaging 16.8 fantasy points per game. That's better than Jared Goff. That's better than Dak Prescott. Jared Goff has been balling over the last 3 games, but he's doing better than Dak Prescott. He scored 19 to 23 fantasy points in 3 of the last 5 games, including 2 of the last 3. This dude is balling. And then you got the Panthers allowing the 11th most passing yards, 13th most touchdowns. 4 quarterbacks in 7 games have scored 16 or more against Carolina. Now, the problem with this is the Panthers are 10.5 point favorites over the Panthers, meaning Bo Nix theoretically should not be asked to do a whole heck of a lot to win this game. The Panthers are expected to score just 15 points. So theoretically, the Broncos might score touchdowns with their defense. Their defense is awesome going against Bryce Young. Like we could see defensive touchdowns from the Broncos. And then once they have the lead, the Panthers are giving up the most PPR points per game to opposing running backs, meaning the Broncos could just grab a lead and just feed Javonte Williams. Like Bo Nix just straight up might not be asked to do too much. That is the fear with Bo Nix this week. So to me, it comes down to Dak Prescott or Jared Goff. Now, Dak, we already talked about. He's boomer bust. He all in all, he's not playing well. The last time we saw him on the field against the Lions, he scored less than 5 fantasy points. It's been ugly. Cowboys will be throwing the ball. They'll be playing from behind. 49ers have not been a friendly matchup. But then you got the Lions, and it's kind of the exact same scenario as Bo Nix, where they're 11.5-point favorites, and they have Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. You get a pretty good sense of where the ball's going to go, right? Just feed the ball to your stud running backs. You have 2 of them. Give them the ball. So is Jared Goff going to be asked to do a whole heck of a lot? I'm guessing not. So ultimately, if you have to pick one of these guys, the thing that is ultra appetizing about Goff is that the Lions are expected to score. They have the highest implied point total among all 32 teams on the slate. They're expected to score 28 points, according to Vegas. That's higher than anybody. That automatically gives Jared Goff opportunity to score touchdowns. And the Titans are actually pretty tough on running backs, and they have been for years. The Titans have been one of the best teams in football against running back for years. So you're hoping that if the Lions score touchdowns, it's through Jared Goff. And Jared Goff, like I said, he has been playing he started the season terribly, but he's playing really well in the last 3 games. He's scored 18 or more fantasy points in each of the last 3 games. He scored 25.1 in week 6. He's averaging 16.4 fantasy points per game. I would be going with Jared Goff here. I'd be betting on that high implied total. I'm not expecting the world. Like, I would not go into this thinking like, oh man, shootout, back and forth, Jared Goff is going to go off. But the hope here is that he gets you 2 touchdown passes. 2 touchdown passes and 250 yards. That's what you're hoping for with Jared Goff. I don't love any of the other options. I don't like. There's nothing about Dak or Bo Nix that's telling me those guys are going to score 20, 30 plus points. We really need to see a massive turnaround from the Cowboys offense coming out of their bye week. It's really hard to feel confident in them after what we saw against Jared Goff and the Lions in week 6. But if this were me and I'm making this decision for my own team, I'm going to go with Goff there. Oh, thank you. I really, Alekos. Okay, I got you. I appreciate you sharing that. I will try my best. Alekos. I can remember that. If Bucky misses, is Sean Tucker startable? Yeah, he'd be. If Bucky misses, then Sean Tucker's an RB3/flex. He's not super exciting. There's not a lot of upside there. He's not gonna like suddenly be running ahead of Rashad White, but he's on the radar. Thank you, sir. That's awesome analysis. Thank you, Fett. Really, really, really appreciate that. Chase, love it. Alekos, love it. Thank you. Oh man. This is so nice. Such a nice thing to say. Smash that like button as this guy needs to be noticed. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. See, and here's the thing. I understand there's totally a like secret sauce to fantasy football. Like I understand it's like I don't necessarily want to share. I know that my subscribers don't want to share this because they don't want their league mates and their competition to find it. So I totally understand all that. And I'm not on a mission to find everybody. I just want to find, my group of people. That's all. All right, this is going to be my last one, guys. Christian Sherlock. Every single week I do this, it gets longer and longer. It's supposed to be 1 hour. Suddenly it's 2 hours, and here I am going on 2.5 hours. This is going to be my last one, though, because my back is killing me. I got to get some lunch. My kids have been waiting for me for like an hour. Christian Sherlock says, start 2. Stevenson, Rico, Deontay. So Deontay is Stevenson and Rico. Like, Deontay Johnson, he's not even practicing today. He's apparently supposed to play, but man, when you're not practicing on Fridays, that is a bad sign. Yet, Bryce Young is going to be playing quarterback this week. That's bad for everybody involved. Let me pop it over here. Game number 13, Deontay Johnson. Here we go. Panthers expected to score just 16 points, so we're not looking for touchdowns there. In 2 full games with Bryce Young that Deontay Johnson played this week, He caught a fantasy useless 5 of 12 targets for 34 yards. 5 catches, 34 yards in 2 games with Bryce Young. He scored 3.9 in week 1 and then 4.5 in week 2. And then you got the Broncos, by the way, who are absolutely suffocating wide receivers, holding them to the 3rd fewest PPR points per game. Just 7 wide receivers in 7 games have been able to muster up even just 10 PPR points against the Broncos. Chris Godwin did well. Cedric Wilson hit against the Broncos, but DK Metcalf, JSN, George Pickens, Mike Evans, Garrett Wilson, and all Chargers wide receivers, all of them missed against the Broncos. And now you got Deontay Johnson, who's hurt and playing with Bryce Young. Like, Deontay Johnson is a no thank you. I love him with Andy Dalton. I do not love him this week. To be clear, I'm not banging the table for Rico Dowdle. I don't love him this week. And I definitely don't love Ramondre Stevenson playing in a game where they are 7-point underdogs against a really tough Jets defense. So I don't love any of these options, but Deontay is not even an option in my estimation this week. All right, guys, man, this was a ton of fun. Hopefully you guys had fun. Hopefully you found this ultra super duper helpful. Again, if you like what you see with the heat map, again, this is 30 plus hours of weekly research on every single player in every single team, every single game, or every single week. It's the resource. It's the tool that led to me quitting the corporate world so that I could basically start chasing this dream full time. I'm dropping the link one last time in the comment section if you want to scoop it up. The week 4 heat map is just a week 8 heat map is just $4.99. And otherwise you can get the whole rest of the season for just $2.79 per heat map using the link that I just left for you in the comments. Just grab it right from the shop in my Patreon channel. Other than that, though, guys, come back. The next time you see me will most likely be on Tuesday morning when I put out my waiver wire episode that I record and put out on Tuesday mornings. And then again, come back, put it in your calendar, come back every single Friday where I do exactly what I did today. I go live on the Basement Brood Fantasy Football YouTube channel and I answer as many questions as I possibly can. I lost track of how many we got into today, but hopefully you guys found this helpful. Thank you for tuning in to episode 45 of Inside the 20. We're getting there. By Basement Brood Fantasy Football, I'm Mikey Henninger. I hope you have an awesome week. I will see you on the fantasy football field, and good luck in week 8.